participants, before starting this session, which is named Realizing Digital Potential for Sustainable Economic Transformation in the Wake of COVID-19, I would like to give a floor for household announcement. Ainur, UNSCAP, please go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Ainur. I will make housekeeping announcements today for the second day of this economic forum. I want to warmly welcome you to the second day of the 2020 SPECA Economic Forum. And we are all excited that you are here and look forward to your active participation. Please note that the forum is bilingual, English and Russian. You can select the language you want to listen to by clicking on the respective interpretation channel. On behalf of our interpreters, I want to inform you that our interpreters will alternate every 20 minutes. Speakers and participants are requested to be mindful of the additional difficulties experienced by interpreters when working in remote mode and on the increased likelihood of disruptions to the audio feed to the interpreters. Only the speech of intervention in the original language is authentic and constitutes an authentic record of the proceedings. In case of any inconsistency between the interpretation and the speech of intervention in the original language, the latter shall prevail. Interpreter service in remote meetings cannot be held liable for interruption of service, pixelation, freezing, or loss of visual input, partial or complete loss of audio, audible artifacts, unauthorized access to personal or confidential data, leaking of information due to inadequate soundproofing, and or data loss. We would like also to remind our participants who might have difficulties with connecting on Kudo, because Kudo needs a little very good streamline connection. You can also join us on YouTube live stream that throughout the session and post your questions on YouTube chat. Our colleagues will select and forward your questions to the moderator. We would like also to say that your presentations will be moderated centrally from our from ESCAP Hall. Therefore, please don't forget to say next for the next slide when you will be presenting. With this housekeeping announcements out of the way, I now give the word to our Mr. Chairman, Mr. Akhmatov Sultan Mamatovich. Thank you.
Спасибо, Айнур. Я думаю, ваше объявление очень полезно для наших участников.
Thank you, Ainur. I hope this was a useful information for our participants. Now I would like to ask if Madam Michaela is on the line. It looks like she is still experiencing. Oh, okay. I see Michaela, she is finally on the line. Good morning, Madam Frabeck Story. Can you hear us now?
Good morning, Michaela. Yes. We hear you.
Very well. Thank you then. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Would you like me to take over the session from here?
Yeah. I think today in Almaty or Kazakhstan it's cold. We have some problem with connection.
Well, I'm hope that this session that is focusing on the digital potential will also address the kind of issues related to connectivity. So it's very timely. Thank you very much. So let's move in. let's move into this fourth session of this economic forum. Your Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michaela Friberg-Story, and I am the United Nations Resident Coordinator Designate here in Kazakhstan. It is an honor for me to take part in this important discussion and forum today. Allow me first to note that we are meeting the same way today that we are meeting our colleagues, our family, and our friends during this pandemic. We are meeting online, thanks to digital technology. In this next session, we are going to focus on some of the challenges and opportunities related to realizing digital potential for sustainable economic transformation in the wake of COVID-19. A new technological era is brought to us by the ongoing industrial fourth revolution. It has vast opportunity, but also some new risks. In recognition of this, as we know, the United Nations Secretary General appointed a high-level panel on digital cooperation to consider the question of the digital cooperation. He did this in July 2018, and the mandate was to look at and discuss ways that we work together to address both social, ethical, legal, and economic impact of digital technologies. The panel was asked to maximize benefits and minimize harms. And in particular, the Secretary General asked the panel to consider how digital cooperation can contribute to the achievement of the SDGs. And that is, of course, also the discussion's focus today. The potential of digitalization is huge. We see it in, for example, artificial intelligence implied in healthcare, which allows us to create more specific diagnosis to sustain health and prolong life. We see it as it relates to education. Virtual and online distance learning have spread educational programs to students around the world, to hundreds of thousands of students in this region, millions, to be honest. Public services are also becoming more efficient, more accessible, and more accountable through blockchain-powered systems and other innovations. However, not everyone equally benefits from the transformative potential of digital technologies. According to ITU, the digital gender gap has increased on average from 12 to 17% between 2017 and 19. And I'm sure this is something that we're going to come back to in our discussions here today as well. The COVID-19 pandemic has underlined the potentials and the risks in digitalization. To paraphrase the United Nations Secretary General, the current generation will have to decide if our legacy will be a set of technologies that will only boost the wealthiest and most connected in our societies, or if we will create a digital world that strengthens human rights, advances peace, and improves all lives, leaving no one behind. That is why we, during this session, will discuss how realizing digital potential in the region can help countries to build back better after COVID-19. We will bring out some focus areas for digitalization that can facilitate economic transformation in line with countries' long-term development strategies, and as such, be inspired, I hope, of new ideas and innovation that can help us achieve the Sustainable Agenda 2030. To help us do that, we have 5 distinguished panelists with us today who will be followed by 3 discussants that each will bring up maybe more of a cross-cutting theme of ensuring that we do not leave anyone behind. With that, allow me to turn to our first panelist, Mr. Nikolai Pomoshnikov. Mr. Pomoshnikov is the officer in charge of the ESCAP sub-regional office for North and Central Asia. He has extensive experience in bilateral and multilateral diplomacy, and he will today share with us some words and thought on realizing digital potential in the North and Central Asia. With that, if technology is with us, I hand over the floor to you. Please, Nikolai.
Thank you, Michaela. Could you please, colleagues, put my slides? Excellencies, distinguished participants, dear colleagues, let me start my presentation. My presentation was prepared in English, and to embrace more audience, let me speak in Russian. Уважаемые участники,
distinguished participants, of today's forum, I'm really pleased to be here with you and participate in these discussions. SANCA, Sub-Regional Office for North and Central Asia, prepared that analytical paper specifically for our countries in cooperation with the Eurasian Development Bank. And this analytical paper was discussed with the participation of experts at the working group back in September. And I would like to familiarize you with the major developments of this and conclusions. Actually, this work covers or analyzes the situation in the Northern and Central Asia in the field of digitalization. It provides analysis of digital transformation in our countries and offers analysis on the situation in the field of digitalization in each of our countries in North and Central Asia, as well as contains certain recommendations for decision makers. Of course, digitalization contains both positive and certain risks. And this paper demonstrates this, talking about the opportunities provided by digitalization process. We have to highlight optimization of production processes, optimization of resource base, knowledge of nomenclature of products and services available, automation of industry. Looking at the risks, we can say that, of course, or challenges. There are challenges in terms of reduction in available jobs, because automation presses out certain jobs, specifically those associated with low-skilled workforce. And there is a significant digital divide based on gender, geographic factors, and age. And of course, there is a rather big digital divide between rural and urban areas. If you look at this chart, so the upper line shows the level of OECD countries' development. And you can see here that a number of countries in Central and Northern and Central Asia, such as Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Russian Federation, are almost coming up to this like reference level of development. But as far as other countries are concerned, there is a significant divide, there is significant gap, so which shows that there is no adequate development. Talking about digitalization in each country, and this paper provides this analysis, we have to say that all our countries pay much attention to digitalization. So as far as Kyrgyz Republic is concerned, which is the chairperson of SPECA, so there is a strategy, Digital Kyrgyzstan for 2019 through 2023, which is efficiently being implemented. Other countries also have strategic documents, Kazakhstan, Russian Federation, and as well as other countries. Of course, the situation with digitalization in our countries is not so simple, not so easy. There are certain challenges in its development, such as underdeveloped digital infrastructure, level of digital literacy, so it's not equal in all countries. Of course, there are certain technological competitiveness processes between various sectors, and quite natural that the level of regional cooperation is not high enough in this area. You know that for broadband internet, which is the base for, or the foundation for economic growth, increase of employment, innovations, and trade. Like 10% increase of broadband penetration leads to GDP increase as minimum by 1%. By 1% is minimum, according to the experts. And internet penetration growth by 1% correlates with export growth by 4.3% as minimum. So, and these figures are well known. This slide shows the level of ICT products in exports in our countries. Of course, it is rather low. If we look at the figures, say average number of the share, average share is 0.23%, whereas in the countries of OECD that I mentioned, so this indicator is 7.1%. I would say that in this paper contains certain recommendations. What is necessary to do in order to improve and enhance digitalization development in the economy in our countries? Of course, important role is played by governments in all these processes. Therefore, the environment which is created and encouraged by the government for the development of digitalization plays a big role. Of course, much significance is given to the legal base, regulatory framework for the development of digitalization. It's important, extremely important, to create environment to train skilled personnel, skilled labor resources. Therefore, improvement of qualification and skills is important. Important role is played by creation of e-government and the infrastructure necessary for this. And this will provide for the development of digitalization. And of course, reforming statistics, national statistics, in compliance with international standards. I would say that UNESCAP and our colleagues from UNEC provide assistance to our countries in terms of improvement of skills for statistical agencies and statistical workforce, so statistical staff, so they just carry out big work in this regard. Our work highlights the focus areas for development of digital potential, which shows really promising potential in terms of future developments. This comprises e-commerce, specifically for SMEs. We know good examples from Southeastern Asia where e-commerce is developing at high pace. So here we have to implement digitalization into agriculture, which would provide for a big breakthrough. And financial sector, of course, supply chains and logistics. As far as recommendations are concerned, among major recommendations, I would like to focus on such recommendations as development of digital strategies in our countries. As I already said, certain work has been done here, but it is necessary to maybe revise the time frame to implement these strategies, because as you know, the pandemics just pushes all our countries to more active, proactive actions in this sphere. I would also like to emphasize the necessity of increasing investments into such sectors as science, technology, and innovation. Of course, and we are just lagging behind significantly from developed countries in this regard. And of course, it is necessary to take certain measures and exert efforts. And we have to strengthen regional cooperation to develop it in a more proactive way in terms of sharing best practices. I think my colleagues from international, from IMU and from European Commission, IDC, will share their, and from ITU, will share their recommendations with our countries. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention.
Over to you, Michaela.
Thank you very much for this. Thank you, Nikolai. We will come back to the points that you raised here as we move into the discussion, and I'm sure it will be picked up also by the other presenters. Thank you very much. With this, we are moving to our second presentation, Mr. Mario Apostolov. Mr. Apostolov is the regional advisor at United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. He focuses on trade facilitation and notably the framework of the UN Center for Trade Facilitation and Electronic Businesses. Today, he will share with us some thoughts and ideas to support digitalization of information flows, digital corridors, and single window system using the UN standards. Please, Mr. Apostolov, over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Thank you very much. Mr. Rahmatov, nice to see you once again. Dear Mrs. Freeberg-Story, congratulations for your nomination. In ECE, as you mentioned, I'm the regional advisor in trade facilitation especially, but also I coordinate SPECA. And I am also the focal point for contacts with several resident coordinators, including with Kazakhstan. We had perfect cooperation with Mr. Norimasa Shimomura, and I'm convinced that we will develop the same and maybe even better cooperation with you. So without much ado, I will turn to my presentation for better connectivity with with our partners in the SPECA countries. I will switch to Russian, but also I would like to state from the beginning that my presentation is a continuation of my yesterday's presentation and the very interesting discussion that we started already yesterday. And the buzzwords which already yesterday we discussed here are interconnectivity, and interconnectivity about between different modes of transport, different sectors, and the role of UN standards as a public good. So thank you. I will switch to Russian now. Please turn to the next slide. Вот на этом слайде указано, что указан проект.
As you see on this slide, we see the project which is being developed since the beginning of the pandemic of COVID-19, which started this spring. And the project was developed together with 5 regional UN commissions, including the ECE and UN ESCAP and UNCTAD as well. And in this project, which is a response to the challenges of COVID-19 in terms of connectivity, the ECE has a standard on exchanging data and corresponding standards in multimodal corridors. I would like to dwell on this specific topic now, because as yesterday we mentioned already, many people could develop electronic papers and solutions, but unless there are no common standards which allow us to exchange seamlessly data between various papers, format, various modes of transport and sectors, including agricultural sectors, I'm talking about regulatory paper declarations and others, then there would be no sense to do the digitalization, because sporadic or fragmented digitalization could cause only additional issues. And at this slide, I would like to specify what we're doing, in fact, within this project. And here we develop some standards for specific papers, such as connoissement, CMI, and bill of lading, and some other important papers. But since May this year, we are involved to develop the standards which are not yet there, which are not yet supported by the United Nations Center for Trade Facilitation and Development, Common Papers for Businesses. The main idea is to develop a set of common standards for various papers which are associated with trade. And that is why this will be standards for electronic data exchange through a single shop window. And of course, single window approach is nothing new. For more than 10 years, we have been working with the Central Asian states, including Kazakhstan, where we've got already some accomplishments in Issyk-Kula, for instance, in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan since January the 1st, we launched a single window. But the idea is that the data is at the businesses, and now we have to promote the system to the states, and we have to do this seamlessly in terms of switching from one transportation mode to another. For instance, if container had been transshipped from ship to a railroad and then from railroad to motor transport, the idea is to establish a seamless process for this transshipment operations and correspondingly data processing. And of course, we know that data on transportation vehicles should be ahead of the cargo itself. That is why interoperability is a key word in this chain of supply under the pandemic conditions. Paradoxically, pandemic provides us a window of opportunity to develop specifically this understanding that we have to drift away from sectoral approaches in terms of data exchange. We have to drift away also from institutional or corporate interests to much more common understanding. And the United Nations definitely has a role to play in terms of providing standards and models which will be easy to understand to all the stakeholders. Next slide. Here we have a number of papers which, as you see, the ECMR Bill of Lading, and we also have some multimodal papers, including invoices, which are already prepared. The next set of paper, which we're about to finish developing standards. Most of them are already there. And the next one is a set of paper which we're about to finish by the end of this year, including some key papers such as consignment, railway consignment notes, and a maritime waybill, and some other important papers. Thank you. And next slide. And all those things are in line with the reference data model and with the World Customs Organization in particular. And in this slide, I would like to demonstrate you a concept. If we will create to every mode of transportation a list of data which is harmonized with the international standards and model data, things which I have already mentioned, and those data is harmonized with international data. Now we can create an environment where we could have very seamless flow of data from one sector to another, from one transport mode to another, including, of course, agricultural paper, the various declarations, permits, etc. And once we're talking about this seamless flow of data, and Also, we have to think about legal background for every paper, and it could be somehow signed, endorsed, and then it will be harmonized with conventions which are managing all those operations. Here we have figuratively what we have in terms of multimodal corridor. For instance, we have a container which is moving by various modes of transportation, and the data moves from one sector to another, from one mode of transport to another, and the same papers are provided to the state authorities for declarations of export imports, various transport papers, etc. Here we have, based on the one specific paper, which is a multi-modal waybill, and here we have information on every specific operations. This pinkish boxes down below, and from one paper to another. If we're talking about standard format, they could be actually provided in terms of various elements, and in this way we could build up interoperability. And here we had a number of harmonization efforts between various papers such as ETR, railroad consignment note, including also certificate of origin, invoices for customs, etc. This is a uh, very technical exercise which has been already done so far by the project. And more importantly, these all things are harmonized with the reference model of multimodal transportation, which could be a common denominator in order to build up this interoperability. I have already noticed that some of the papers had been accomplished, including the CMGS and others, ETR, and according to the informational reference note on multimodal data, multimodal transport data, just demonstrate this slide in terms of specifications of various business reference model for TMGS, which is Railroad Bill of Lading. And here we have a number of ETR data representation, and based on all those efforts, we could build up rather sustainable digital corridors through which we could seamlessly convey data from one point to another. And this is my final slide in this presentation. Here you see where we could get these standards based on our website address. This is my final slide. The only thing which I would like to say at the end, that we are cooperating with many multilateral international organizations like FIATA. We also had a discussion with OCGD in terms of making this electronic consignment note, the railroad consignment note, to harmonize it between the railroad, which services railroad connection between China and Europe, in order to make harmonization of this railroad consignment note with the others. And of course, this is a very interesting opportunity for us to build up more projects on digital multimodal corridors, including with Central Asian states of SPECA. I thank you for your attention. And if you have questions, you are welcome to have them at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very informative presentation on this aspect. And I think there's many of us in this forum who look forward to engaging further with yourself and your team, and to see how we can support and understand better the multimodal transportation and interoperability work that you are spearheading in this work. So thank you very much for that.
Okay.
I'm sure there will be questions as we move on in this session. With that,
Thank
we
you.
are moving to Mr. Andrew Beklemishev, who is our next presenter. He is the Vice President for Central Asia, Azerbaijan, Mongolia of the International Data Corporation. He specializes in digital transformation strategies for businesses, cities, and countries. Today, he is here with us to share some ideas and thoughts on the future of intelligence, utilizing data to facilitate digital transformation. Please, Mr. Beklemishev, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Dear Michaela, thank you. Hello, everyone, distinguished speakers and the audience, excellencies. It is a pleasure and an honor to be presenting the information that IDC has gathered and synthesized in our ongoing research of this important field of artificial intelligence, or essentially what it is that we are doing with data and why we're doing with this with data, and how data can help us further develop economically. So as mentioned, I am Vice President at IDC, and I'm also Vice President of the International Academy of CIO, Chief Information Officers. Can we go to the next slide, please? Today, everyone is talking about data. And the first question is what the point of all this data is. But let's start with a bit of an imagination exercise. Just imagine if our organizations could double their productivity, half the time it takes to respond to customers, increase the success rate of new products or services that are launched by, for example, 25%, or identify early signals of disease outbreaks, essentially predicting them. Next slide, please. In our surveys, we have found that 87% of top managers consider enterprise intelligence as their priority. Next slide, please. So this is what I want to talk to you about today. We'll first start with the definition of intelligence or artificial intelligence and what it means. We will then take a look at the current state and approaches that we see globally, and then we'll look a bit into the future, since this is what IDC focuses on, using the current data to provide insights into the future of technologies. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this is the definition of intelligence that we use, and this is what differentiates enterprises with enterprise intelligence. It's not just simply more data that they have over their competitors, or that they analyze this data better somehow. It is also the ability to continuously learn at scale, to reflect on and to explain outcomes based on that learning, and ultimately to adapt based on this learning faster than the competition. And these enterprises embrace the classic dictionary definition of what intelligence is, which is a noun, and it simply means the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills, and the collection of information of business, military, or political value. Very simple. The definition that we use at IDC is the future of intelligence is an organization's capacity to learn combined with its ability to synthesize the information in order to learn and to apply the resulting insights at scale to gain sustainable competitive advantage, sustainable, which is important, or an ability to fulfill the organizational mission. So while the synthesis of information is a familiar topic to those involved in analytics, business intelligence, and artificial intelligence, and one that garners the highest level of investment, most enterprises face serious challenges in achieving this future state of intelligence. Can we go to the next slide, please? So we, as we look into the future, we looked at enterprises, and this is what we can say about them by 2025. So this is in just 5 years. The enterprises that have artificial intelligence powering its work will see up to 100% increase in their productivity, which will result, and these are the benefits that they will get. These are shortened reaction times, greater product innovation success, and improved customer satisfaction. And these are quite impressive results for any business to achieve. But this, in our opinion, is quite real, and we forecast that this is what will happen by 2025. Can we go to the next slide, please? So what is the current state, and what do we see currently on the markets? Next slide. These are the top 5 reasons for enterprises to adopt AI, and early adopters report, and this is coming from our survey in 2019, so this is already data from last year, outdated, so these are quite real results. So the early adopters report an improvement of almost 25% in their customer experience, accelerated rates of innovation, higher competitiveness, higher margins, and better employee experience with the rollout of AI solutions at their organizations. Worldwide, organizations are adopting AI in their business transformation journey, not just because they can, but because they must be agile, resilient, innovative, and able to scale. And these are actual factual numbers. Can we go to the next slide? Here I would like to start with the, can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, great. I'd like to focus on 3 cases. Public health, because this year public health is very important. Government, and also energy. And energy because for our region, energy is very important. It's the backbone of the economy. So let's start with public health. Epidemic preparedness depends on high quality real-time data, and we've seen this this year, and it's not just real-time data, it's the data that can be shared to support analysis, modeling, and forecasting, as well as automation. Digital tools offer new opportunities for disease surveillance that can feed into early warning systems to predict, monitor, and manage epidemics. COVID-19 outbreak is accelerating the ongoing paradigm shift in epidemic control and public health surveillance driven by big data and AI. Leveraging multi-source data from electronic health records, flight patterns, public health reports, biological, socioeconomic, and environmental data, as well as data from the internet, search, and social media patterns, advanced analytics and AI technology platforms have the potential to help the public health bodies in multiple ways. And we see a lot of healthcare authorities, including in Central Asia, using a lot of these tools already, and the learning curve was very fast. So these are the ways that this can and is already being used. For example, identifying early signals of the outbreak. So health authorities can accelerate response time and make more informed, data-driven decisions, including optimizing and triaging of scarce resources and slowing the spread. AI's biosurveillance platform spotted, for example, unusual pneumonia cases in Wuhan, China, 9 days before the WHO issued alert, later recognizes the emergence of the new coronavirus that led to the global pandemic. So this was essentially the benefit of AI, which essentially signaled this outbreak before it was officially even recognized. Detecting and forecasting COVID-19 spread patterns, identifying who is at risk of contracting the disease, and the sites with heightened risk of poor outcomes. For example, the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control, among other tools supporting its epidemic intelligence information system, uses NLP and social listening techniques to analyze data from the internet and social networks to monitor disease outbreaks. Last but not least, evaluating and optimizing strategies for controlling and minimizing the spread of the epidemic through rapid elaboration of test results and the use of new tools as AI-enabled mobile apps for contact tracing, exposure notification, and etc. And all of these are the tools that we're seeing globally. Can we go to the next slide, please? And these are the results of over 300 healthcare providers that we surveyed, and we asked them two questions, and here are the results. So the first question is your organization using or planning to use artificial intelligence? So these are hospitals reporting, and 29% are already using, and 20% are planning to use in the next 12 months. So essentially in a year, we will have 50% of healthcare institutions using artificial intelligence tools in their current work. And we also asked them in which of the following areas does your organization use or plan to use artificial intelligence systems? And here are the major use cases where they use or plan to use AI. So first is the intelligent patient monitoring, predictive workforce monitoring, natural language processing for medical records, and intelligent assistance for patient interactions. You can see them here on the graph. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is the situation in government. I would simply like to highlight top 3 AI use cases in local government and central or federal government. So when it comes to local government, these are personalizing citizen services and usually done through chatbots, determining optimal level and rates for taxes and fees, and reducing financial fraud and abuse. And this is what we see globally. And for federal government, the 3 top main use cases are determining optimal level for social benefit payments, improving revenue collection, and real-time tracking and reporting of events or incidents. And this is what we see. I list here the top reasons why projects fail, why AI projects fail generally, but also specifically in the government. And the first one, as you can see, is unrealistic expectations. There are also limitations on understanding the technology and the lack of skills and personnel. This is especially important for the government, where the government usually cannot afford these highly sought individuals. Let's go to the next slide, and I will stop here on the situation in the energy sector. And here you see what the primary drivers are, and this is largely driven by the competition. And I also list the major inhibitors for using AI in the energy sector, which is very important to countries of our region, such as Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, where energy sector makes up the majority of the economy. But it's at the same time, it's very important for Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, etc. Let's go to the next slide, because there is not too much time to stop on every slide. Let me just briefly stop on the next steps. Next slide, please. You'll need to click through that, so all of the data comes up. There's a little bit of automation, so can you please click through? Now, this is a map that illustrates the most challenges that face enterprises on their path towards the intelligence. Can you please click through? Next. Yeah, so all the numbers come up. Yeah, great. essentially, you need to get to the top rightmost corner, and it's very difficult, and I will not stop going into the details of that. Next slide, please. And next slide, we'll skip this complicated slide because it will take time. Yeah, next slide. Okay, so let me stop on this one. This is looking into the future, and I wanted to share some of the recent predictions. These came out just this month, and they haven't been formally announced yet, but they are ready, and these are key predictions that will reinforce the points that I have made before. By 2023, we expect 75% of all consumer and small business loans originated through AI-enabled and automated processes. This is just in 3 years. By 2024, 50% of all bank payments will use artificial intelligence and machine learning to continuously optimize payment messaging and routing for cost and efficiency. By 2023, 25% of hospitality operators, so these are hotels and etc., will accelerate intelligence capabilities, acquiring AI startups to build data delivery platforms for personalization, increasing customer loyalty 15%. And by 2026, 70% of global 2,000 manufacturers will use AI to develop guidance and insights for risk-based operational decision-making, compared to less than 5% today. So just imagine, in 6 years, we're going to jump from 5% to 70% in manufacturers adopting AI. So these are quite ambitious predictions, but we see them as quite realistic. So we are going towards sustainable business models by accelerating digital transformation and re-architecting the core of the business. But let me add that in our journey, someone likes to call the road to recovery. This is what everyone is talking, that we are recovering now. We always need to balance the now and the vision, keeping our hands in the now and our eyes in the future. So while we need to work on improving the situation right now, we need to be mindful of what is in the future. And this guidance will help enterprises understand where they can potentially be getting in just a matter of 5 or 6 years. And this is it from me. Next slide with my contact details. You can reach out for additional details on this. I'll be happy to share more of our research. Thank you so much for your attention, and I wish everyone a great day and stay healthy.
Thank you very much for this, Andrew. It's fascinating data that you share with us, and how you see the future. Your predictions here towards the end, I think, is something that will stay with us, especially as we try to ensure that we are leaving no one behind. Their potential, of course, needs us to focus on those that could be left behind. So thank you very much for this positive outlook to the future, where we need to make sure that we engage in filling the gaps. So thank you very much. With this, we move to our next presenter, Mr. Sevak Sarukanyai, who is with us today, and who will be sharing, is the technology with us? Yes. Who is currently working as a consultant for the Eurasian Development Bank. And he has previously worked as an assistant to the chairman of the Eurasian Economic Commission. He is also a visiting researcher at several distinguished academic institutions, including the Center for Eurasian, Russian, and European Studies at Georgetown University, US. Today, he will share with us some thoughts on recovery of free movement through digital instruments. If the technology is with us, please, I hand the floor over to you. Are you with us, Mr. Sarukanyai?
Looks like he's not with us. He's still offline. Maybe
Okay.
you can go back to Mr. Ablai Khan first.
Yes.
Thank you.
Is Mr. Muzubayev with us?
Yes, he is.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Muzubayev. You currently hold the position of Director of International Cooperation Department in the Ministry of Digital Development, Innovations and Aerospace Industry here in the Republic of Kazakhstan. It's a true honor to have you with us today, and thank you for joining us. Today, you are going to share with us some lessons learned from e-governance and the role of government to realize the digital potential. Thank you very much, Mr. Muzubayev. I hand the floor over to you. Thank you.
Спасибо большое, Микаэла. Очень рад.
Thank you very much, Michaela. I'm really glad to welcome all of you here at this event, and I appreciate your interest to digitalization in Kazakhstan. So today's situation associated with COVID-19 showed and underlined that digitalization is the key for recovering Kazakhstan. Currently, our government just pays attention to introducing e-services and e-government in order to support transparency. I would say that more than 82% of all governmental services have been automated, and we are striving at increasing these indicators up to 90% by the end of the year. We are planning to fully automate this sector by 100% through 2025. In addition, mobile application eGov has been introduced, which is used actively by more than 700,000 of our citizens. So it was uploaded more than 7 million times, and more than 70 types of popular services are accessible. I would like you to go to the next slide, please. Services, digital documents was implemented in order to shrink red tape and the necessity to provide documents personally. So this can be used in interaction with the governmental and private organization. I would like also to say that automation of licenses and permits have been just transferred to e-licensing. 452 services has been implemented, 87 licenses, 314 permits, and 51 notifications. We're also implementing approach to the live situation. So just to cover all the processes in order to make them handy. So the service that just to register legal entity has been implemented, and it's been merged with the non-governmental services such as opening bank account and mandatory insurance of personnel from incidents. So this allows just to make it within a single process. Changes of identification characteristics of real estate is being implemented without personal application of an owner in cases when it's initiated by the government. It may be like renaming villages or settlements or streets and other changes. We are also coping with the bottlenecks and just provide the more broader access to the services and information in general. We launched integration platform Smart Bridge, with the help of which the governmental agencies and private companies can use ready products with integration of services of ministries and agencies available at the platform. Private companies can be integrated, can integrate with the governmental organizations, thus creating on their basis new services for their customers. Work is being carried out to provide governmental services at popular commercial platforms, which is handy not only for citizens, but can enhance interest to entrepreneurship. And this removes burden from eGov. So the first step of this kind is registering individual entrepreneur through commercial bank. So I'm not going to advertise the bank, but this is rather popular measure at the moment. We also offer, or we also think that the next service will be implemented, will be re-registering vehicles, again, at commercial bank platforms. Another example of demonopolizing of governmental services is providing governmental services through notaries. And thanks to all these measures taken, Kazakhstan is the 29th out of 193 countries, according to UN survey on e-government development in 2020. And of course, we are glad that we are at this place, but we are not going to stay where we are now. Currently, we are working at creating e-residency. This project offers expats safe access to electronic services in the country. E-residency allows every person globally getting access to electronic government services, which means fully electronic and distance remote interaction with the government when registering, when working with the bank and databases. Currently, 97% of Kazakhstani population have access to internet. By the end of the current year, almost all rural areas, settlements with a population over 250 citizens or residents will be connected to global network. Can you switch, can we go to the next slide, please? We also actively creating innovative ecosystem in order to attain this goal. An international technopark IT startup Astana Hub was created. The major focus will be on increasing the share of Kazakhstani original technologies.
Налоговые преференции участникам Астана Хаб. Я бы даже сказал, беспрецедентные преференции.
For this, unprecedented preferences were provided to Astana Hub participants. They are free from corporate, individual income tax, the VAT, and social tax for non-residents. In order to remove barriers in providing digital technologies and attracting investments, this year we had a number of amendments to our current legislation associated with mining. Due to these measures, which were done by the states, we currently could acknowledge that 6% of the world mining falls into Kazakhstan. And another important development is digitalization of various sectors through digital technological platforms. The head of our states asked us to launch a smart project which could merge big data of the government with entrepreneurship government and with entrepreneurship data, and this would result in a bigger data and much more smooth management over this big data. We spoke with the experts of UN ESCAP and other UN representatives, and UN commends Republic of Kazakhstan for our accomplishments, and we also could provide support to sub-regional neighbors. We have a high rate in terms of telecommunication rate, like fixed communication and broadband internet. First time we had the Innovation and Technologies for Sustainable Development working group meeting online, and this was a very important meeting for us. Technologies were provided in the framework of SPECR, UN ESCAP Secretariat, and with the help of ECE as well. We would like in this regard to ask UN ESCAP and the members of SPECR to support developments of smart portal and new technologies and prepare the monitoring of readiness of our networks for digital resilience. We also would like to have a project of digital hub for Central Asia. We are chairing the working group of SPECR on innovation and for sustainable development. So we would like to have SPECR to continue improvement of uninterrupted digital communication and continue doing monitoring of readiness of our digital networks from the perspective of resilience. Again, I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak and sharing my vision. Thank you again.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Musabayev, and your request for continued regional engagement and partnership is well noted throughout the floor, I am sure. There's definitely a lot of interesting experiences to be heard from Kazakhstan. Thank you for that. With that, I am turning to our last presenter for now, if Mr. Sevak Surukanhanyan is online with us now.
I'm sorry, currently Mr. Sevak is still not with us, so please skip him.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure that there's materials that can be shared later on in relation to his insights that we were looking forward to. So with this, let us turn to our discussants that will now share with us some thoughts on some of the mainstreamed underlying topics that cut across the presentations as we have heard them. I would first like to turn to Ms. Yamsran, if you are with us, who is currently working as the UN Women representative in Kyrgyzstan. Mr. Yamsran, are you with us? Let me see. Yes, I see that you are with us. Great. I understand that you have a vast experience in strategic and managerial leadership in gender and women's issues, having spent more than 20 years focusing on these issues. So we really look forward to hearing some of your comments as you've been with us today. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Madam Moderator, thank you so much, and good morning and good afternoon, colleagues. It is a pleasure to participate in this very important forum today and also provide some suggestions and comments on the basis of the experience of UN Women, both in Central Asia, but also globally. So let me begin by making concrete references to the great presentations and suggestions that were made by all the presenters, and thank them for this very important work that they're actually leading in their respective countries to realize this digital potential for sustainable economic transformation in the wake of COVID-19. It was underscored a number of presentations that the infrastructure, digital literacy, technological competitiveness, regional cooperation are among the important matters, and they are on top of the national agendas. And it is of critical importance that we actually talk about and highlight the leaving no one behind agenda being the centerpiece of the Sustainable Development Agenda. And today we are actually standing right at the start of or I would say the kickoff of the year of or decade of transformation and acceleration. And it is critical that without a proper systems thinking through integrated approach, it will be difficult for both the region and the entire world to utilize fully the transformative nature of the sustainable development. And I think it is more than ever important that it is required, for us to understand much better the criticality of this transformation, by understanding how decision makers and the overall population do understand and interact with the digital platforms and digital opportunities that are offered by this new era. It is of critical also nature that an adaptive planning and implementation are coming as an urgency due to COVID and the challenges that were brought by COVID. And thus, this accelerated learning that we are actually making because of these challenges together can be definitely utilized through the digital platform. And Mr. Pomoshnikov and a number of other presenters have mentioned about the importance of digital literacy. I just wanted to highlight that when we plan and invest in training, it is of critical importance to also underscore the fact that the level and the speed of digital literacy, unfortunately, does not necessarily imply an equal empowerment in any given particular group, especially when we talk about left behind groups and communities. And it is also important to underscore the fact that digital usage does not necessarily lead to meaningful use. And a wide array of also research suggests, including the work that was done by UN Women, is that digital infrastructure is likely to have a negative impact on actually local climate due to the physical space and natural resources that it actually requires. And this have to be taken into account when policy initiatives and investments are taken forward. And as far as the investment is also concerned further, and this also came up as one of the important issues, it is critical to underscore that when creating a digital space and making investment, the actual users of and the benefitors of those great initiatives will be highly likely those from the groups which already are digitally included. And thus a special effort is actually required to reach out to left behind groups, especially women in remote areas, even more so. And it is critical that in the digital ecosystem, when we are actually setting up the regulatory framework, when we are setting up the whole infrastructure behind this ecosystem, we ensure the voices and participation of different parts of the society. Otherwise, we will be enduring this high risk behind this economic development that will be actually driven by a small group of interested and more privileged groups. And I just want to also say that during COVID lockdown, especially during the initial period, we have observed throughout Central Asia region in particular, rising incidences, alarming incidences of violence. And it was unfortunate that it was one of the immediate fallouts of this lockdown measures, which led to closure of which was basically the result of closing of essential life-saving operations like crisis centers. And in the region, we have seen an increase of 35 to even 65%. But at the same time, in this particular context, we have noted that actually it was women's groups in communities who actually managed to bring their voices together to cater the most needed and unavailable services and support. And they were the cornerstone of support that they have also offered to the local public authorities. And these potentials were widely documented, internationally highly recognized. At the same time, their voices were still not heard in decision making. And I can just give an example that women were largely absent from stabs. And by understanding this huge potential and huge role played by women, also youth, and those representatives from different left behind groups, it is a great possibility for economic development planners to basically minimize all potential risks of further layering the current barriers to digital inclusion on top of existing obstacles to development. And in looking towards the post-COVID-19 economic support for the countries in the region, the digital tools really have to be leveraged and served, like in a way that left behind groups, underserved groups are equally benefiting, and so that recovery efforts are actually inclusive, and the outcome of the digital transformation agenda brings about acceleration of progress for all in line with the SDG agenda. So I will stop here and would like to thank for this excellent platform that is organized by UNESCO and UNEC. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for these thoughts. I think it's very important to bear them in mind as we move forward on the digitalization to enhance their economic development, to not leave these groups behind, as you rightly point out. We have a second discussant with us, I hope. Mr. Narozbayev, are you with us? Let me see. If not, then we will pause there for a moment. And our third, no, here we are.
Hello.
Hi, wonderful to see you. Excellent. I hope you've had the possibility to have a good connection and to hear these very interesting presentations as they have been shared with us this morning. You are here today with us as the CEO and co-founder of the Ecomine Venture that focuses on innovative solutions for maritime and the shipping industry. And you're here today to look a little bit and share with us some thoughts also on youth, that is, and innovation, that is such an essential part of entrepreneurship as we move into the future of digitalization and economic transformation. So please share with us your thoughts.
Thank you very much, madam. First, would like to greet everyone. Great presentations. Really enjoyed all of the material that was presented so far. A couple of thoughts. Would like to make a couple of remarks. First, really enjoyed the presentation about creating the digital flows for transport movements across Central Asia and North Asia. Recently, I've been in attendance at a major conference called Global Liner Shipping, and the CEO of Hapag-Lloyd, one of the world's largest container ship lines, noted that as of right now, about 15% of the global container ship lines order flow comes from digital channels, and that the container ship lines are forecasting that this number is only going to increase, and in the next decade is going to reach 50 or even 60%. So definitely the work that's being done right now on optimizing the digital flows of information connected to the movement of goods is of utmost importance. So really praise the work that the colleagues are doing on this front. Also, from my personal experience, my experience in transportation tech dates back all the way to 2011. I've worked in various companies, 3 different continents, in North America, Europe, also in Asia. Right now, our company, Ecomine Ventures, is based in Singapore, but we have our dedicated R&D center in Warsaw, in Poland. And with that being said, we'd like to also, explain why we haven't chosen Central or North Asia as our destination, our spot for R&D. Before I move into that, first, one of the speakers from the ministry in Kazakhstan talked about some of the services that are now being provided in terms of eGov and the ease of starting a business online, getting all the necessary certifications and documents. Definitely would agree with the speaker. I'm a native of Kazakhstan and spent quite a few time here back in Kazakhstan, and would like to highlight that I'm just comparing my personal experience living in the US for a decade, in Europe, in the Netherlands, and then in Moscow. In terms of the availability of services for businesses digitally, Kazakhstan is definitely one of the leading nations in my personal experience. And this is really great. It's great to see. And all the work that is being done on this front, I think has been very, very effective. Now, all this work now sets a foundation for new technological companies being born here in Kazakhstan. And I think one of the initiatives that was mentioned in the presentation is called Astana Hub. And all the tax reliefs, all the tax breaks, all the other perks that are being provided are also, I think I would agree, almost unprecedented. I think I've only seen it done better in Belarus, in the high-tech park, which became quite famous. But I think Kazakhstan and Belarus in the former Soviet Union would be probably the two leaders in terms of providing businesses, technological businesses, with these opportunities. However, I would say that one of the biggest problems and one of the reasons why I, as a businessman, as a founder of a technological business, didn't choose to relocate here to Kazakhstan or any other place in Central Asia, I would say is the quality of technological labor force, the quantity and plus the quality. And this is a problem not just for Kazakhstan, but for Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, all of the countries in the region, Mongolia as well. While local universities produce thousands of what we call IT specialists on an annual basis, once these specialists enter the workforce, they very quickly realize that the skills that they have gained during the 4 years of studying are not necessarily, what the employer is looking for. For example, here in Kazakhstan, when you look at the programmers, you can divide them into 3 groups: senior, middle, and junior. And this is based on the skill set and the experience. So in Kazakhstan, for example, there's a very small number of senior programmers, and most of them eventually move to different places. USA, Silicon Valley, European hubs. There are many junior programmers. However, the bulk of the work typically in an IT company, the bulk of the work is typically done by what we call a middle programmer, middle developer. And this middle developer as a class almost is not existent in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan. I mean, I've done a very thorough research, tried to find the appropriate number of programmers for my company. Unfortunately, I couldn't. So that's why I'm in Poland, in Warsaw. I do have folks from Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan working for me in Warsaw office, but they relocated some time ago. So I was able to recruit them there locally. So I think the first problem would be, just the labor force. And I know the universities are now working together with the regulators and with the business community, trying to close that gap. But I would almost raise an alarm, because this gap needs to be closed as fast as possible, as soon as possible. Otherwise, we're at risk of becoming what I would call, an innovation borderland. Not being at the forefront, but being all the way in the rear. And the second thing, and I'm very involved, and why I can speak about the Central Asian IT sector and the youth. I'm very involved in the local community, and always try to contribute, do a lot of guest lectures. I meet with a lot of entrepreneurs. A lot of them come to me for help in attracting venture capital funds. Also gaining clients in North America and Western Europe. And what I'm seeing, even in Astana Hub is a great idea, a great initiative. But what I'm seeing, unfortunately, is I would say 90+% of the companies that work, within Astana Hub, they only focus on local markets, and primarily Kazakhstan, and don't think about exports. And obviously, our markets by themselves are quite small. Despite the fact that Central and North Asia are very important in global supply chains, very few startups actually look at opportunities in transportation, in logistics, in warehousing management, something that is very natural for this region, since we are such an integral part of the global supply chain. So I would say the second problem is just to focus on local markets, and also the fact that when people are developing new technological ideas, new initiatives, they don't look at industries where we naturally should be looking at. So I think these would be my remarks, and really enjoyed all the presentations, and was very helpful. And I think it's very of utmost it's of utmost importance for the regulators to work very closely with the business side, so to get the feedback of the business. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those very constructive and empirical inputs that you gave us. And I do take note of the importance you raised as it comes to skills, having the right skills, and also the market focus. And this discussion is certainly something that will continue. We are moving towards the end, and I believe that we had one more discussant, Ms. Polomska. Is Ms. Polomska with us? Excellent. Thank you very much for joining us. Ms. Polomska, while we wait for your picture and the microphone to come up with us, let me allow me to present you. There, now you are the Senior Policy Analyst and Manager in International Telecoms Union. And I understand you focus on innovative public-private partnership building. And today you are going to share with us some of the thoughts, as you've heard the discussions today, on socioeconomic aspects of regional infrastructure, connectivity, policy, and broadband. So thank you very much, Anna. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for this wonderful presentation. And Your Excellencies and dear colleagues and colleagues, distinguished participants, it is my pleasure to present today on behalf of International Telecommunication Union, which is the specialized agencies for ICT. And the ITU's core work and mission is to extend connectivity to everyone. So one thing that COVID pandemic has highlighted beyond any doubt is the vital importance of connectivity. Digital has emerged as the kind of a hidden hero, and broadband is helping us maintain businesses, continuity by teleworking, access to education platforms with remote learning, use of telemedicine for health information, and so on. And according to the recent studies, overall internet traffic has increased by approximately 30% due to the spike of the telecommunications network surge. So the internet has become a fundamental part of the support to the COVID recovery efforts and preparedness for the new normal, which will be post-pandemic normal. However, in 2020, almost half of the global population still has no access to the online world. According to the ITU data, where broadband adoption has grown substantially over the last years, still around 46% of the world remains unconnected, which accounts for around 3.6 billion people who are still being offline. The digital divide has been highlighted as a key barrier to power digitalization as a factor to mitigate the COVID pandemic disruption. Unserved and partially served populations cannot actually benefit from digital services and online solutions as such. And beyond coverage, we have also demand-side barriers such as limited affordability or digital illiteracy as some of the critical aspects. To realize the goal of universal broadband connectivity, it will require huge investments and for sure multi-stakeholder effort. It is in our new ITU study, Connecting Humanity study, that we estimate that at least $428 billion will be needed to get networks out there to the unserved communities by the 2030s, so by the SDGs decade. So, but the infrastructure alone will not be sufficient, and this we could hear today at our discussion already. We will need networks and services which are accompanied by the efforts to improve affordability. We need to build digital skills, as our colleague from UN Women just highlighted, and to stimulate creation of relevant, accessible content to forge innovative policy frameworks, and also to foster enabling environments which promote further growth, as also mentioned by our colleagues today, Mr. Nikolai, as highlighting different recommendations from the ESCAP study, for instance. For sure, the need to develop a new whole of the government approach to the ICT's investment is critical. Because when ICT investments are fragmented among different ministries and not well coordinated within the same country, it risks causing capacity inefficiencies and resource shortfalls at precisely the time when the investments in ICTs are the most needed. So let me just very quickly zoom into the Central Asia countries. So for instance, in general, for Asia and Pacific, little more than 48% of the population are using internet. Also, GSMA intelligence is giving the estimate mobile broadband penetration at the level of 70% in Europe and Central Asia. However, from our interactive transmission maps, which are the cutting-edge ICT data mapping platform, which takes stocks of the national backbone connectivity, it shows that most of the Central Asia countries are the landlocked countries. And for instance, case of Uzbekistan or Tajikistan, they are actually double landlocked. They suffer from higher international connection fees in the world. In the case of Uzbekistan, it might be even 100 times higher than in Singapore. And these countries need to be connected from, for instance, Europe or Pakistan or China via satellite. And the internet traffic management at the sub-regional level is to maximize the available bandwidth can cause a digital divide with the sub-regions. Coming back to the investment needs at the regional level, connecting the population by 2030 in the East Asia and Pacific was estimated at around 83 billion in the Asia Pacific, and in Europe and Central Asia for around $33 billion according to the same ITU study. Let me just quickly highlight, like, reaching the remote and rural communities poses added obstacles and challenges, including demographic and geographical barriers. So, for example, small landlocked countries require larger OPEX and CAPEX due to different factors like reduced economies of scales, higher international transit costs, and interconnection rates. It is also important to know that Central Asia region is prone to natural disasters such as earthquake, landslides, and so on. And the infrastructure rollout plans need to consider this for the resilience, which might increase the cost of investments. Here, just to finish, I would like to highlight the work of our ITU regional office in Asia Pacific, which is currently undertaking some mapping as well of the connectivity situation within the countries, for instance, Afghanistan. And one important element which is enabling infrastructure development and investment is the policy and regulatory environment, also highlighted today at the debate. Central Asia benefits from the whole of the government approach in updating its policy and regulations. The commitment from the higher level policy makers makes it easier to implement the whole government approach. Just to highlight maybe a few initiatives to finish. So one is that ITU is leading to as a regional and digital cooperation is the REC for COVID. It's just the platform for the policymakers to share the best practices. Is, for instance, Connect to Recover, which is the global initiative that aims to reinforce digital infrastructure and ecosystem for different beneficiary countries. And it's, for instance, the GIGA initiatives that is one of the countries, like Kazakhstan, is signed to lead as the regional leader for Central Asia. Thank you very much for this, and I'll stop here. The time is running out. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, and I really appreciate you raising all those issues, because I think it wraps up how the morning session has panned out, and many of the things we have discussed and that we take with us. It is clear before today, but it has also been underlined in our discussions today, that SPECA countries have a strong potential for digital cooperation, especially in transportation sectors, supply chains, and logistics. We see that internet penetration raises steadily and fast in all countries. We see how the breakthrough leading technologies are applied throughout the region, such as artificial intelligence and big data. And they do have the potential for this very broad application and bringing us forward to transformative change. As we're doing this, as we're going digital in our economic development and our fight in this pandemic, it is absolutely essential, and we agree, that we must not forget about those that we risk leaving behind. I believe that today's discussions has allowed us to yet again put focus on the potentials and the risks. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. And with this, I hand over back to our honorable chair of this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Michaela Friberg-Story. Yes, in effect, a very promising area it is. And the discussion that we had today, we just listened to the opinions and challenges existing both of technical nature and political to a certain extent. But the mere fact that we are moving in this area toward this, I think that the future is for digitalization. I think we attain this future together, and it will help us to implement our cooperation in a new scale and at a new level. Before closing the session, I would like to congratulate Madam Michaela Friberg-Story with her designation. Like 1 week, you just came into your position, you took your position. We would like to wish you fruitful activities and work, and we hope that your rich experience would allow implementing projects, many projects in Kazakhstan and regionally. Thank you very much. Sultan Mamatovich, I think Altenbay Khan would like to take the floor.
Смотрите, да.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see all of you here in this meeting, and thank you to UNEC and UNESCO for organizing this meeting for us in this challenging time. And I will go very shortly, not to take your time. Although we cannot predict anything definitely during this challenging pandemic times, it's one thing that we are certain of: businesses will not go back to pre-pandemic period anytime soon. And COVID-19 crisis is a dress rehearsal for the post-pandemic period for future challenges. And digitalization will be the game changer between success and failure in these new normal times. Most of countries, especially developed economies, are on the front line of the digitalization. Since new economic opportunities, growth of productivity, improvement of quality of goods and services at a lower cost go hand in glove with digitalization. In this sense, the presentations made by panelists and by discussants are very important for our region, and we think that all the analyses made by them will help us to go more far with digitalization, with digital potential. And in Azerbaijan, great importance has always been attached to the application of information and communication technologies in different areas of economy. And I would like especially to mention that we have started the process of establishing the affiliate center of the Fourth Industrial Revolution Center of World Economic Forum in Baku, and we hope that the creation of this affiliate center will be a good hub for the region to develop regional digital potential. And SPECA especially will help us, UNEC and UNESCAP will help us to go more far with this hub and to develop our potential. Thank you very much for your attention.
Большое спасибо, госпожа Мустафаева. Мы знаем.
Thank you very much, Madam Mustafa. We know that you're very active at many platforms, that you always provide good like proposals, that you put forward good proposals, that you inform people, and that just promotes development of our platforms and convergence of our countries. Thank you very much. And now, distinguished colleagues, let me pass over to session number 5, economic policy and strategies of financing to support socio-economic recovery. The moderator of this session is our big friend of Kyrgyz Republic government, UN resident coordinator in Kyrgyzstan, Mr. Ozonia Ogiello. Please, Mr. Ogiello, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Excellency. And welcome to session 5. I would actually suggest that the preceding sessions up to this moment are actually the building blocks, the foundations for the discussions we will have at this session. Because all of those excellent ideas, we have to develop the relevant policies and articulate the financing strategies that make them work. So we are at a crucial moment in the SPECA region, given the impact of COVID-19. And the key question for ourselves is, are we embarking on the right fiscal and monetary measures? What are the options and what are the paths for mobilizing adequate resources and implementing the financing strategies that lead to sustainable recovery and do not create adverse implications in expansionary policies such as unsustainable debt levels? These are the big questions that our governments are grappling with, because many of our governments are indebted in the desire to provide all the needed responses that protect our people, not just from the health impact, but also from the socio-economic impact of COVID-19. So our session will therefore analyze some of the fiscal and monetary measures and the financing strategies that our member states have introduced, but we want to check on their effectiveness. We want to look at the implications for medium-term stability of our economies, but we also want to analyze how aligned with the 2030 agenda the Sustainable Development Goals are. So I have a great panel, and I'd like to begin by inviting my panelists so that we'll get to the meat of the problem. Each of my two main lead speakers will speak for about 15 minutes. I would like to strongly urge them to keep to the time allocation so that I do not have to remind them of that the time is up. And then I'm going to have a couple of discussants who I will invite one after another to respond to all the issues that the panelists have raised. I will also problematize 4 questions for my panelists, and they are welcome to look at either of the questions while they make their own interventions. So let us then begin. And I would like to warmly welcome my first lead speaker. This is Dr. Hamza Ali Malik, who is the Director for the Macroeconomic Policy and Financing for Development Division at ESCAP. Dr. Malik brings some interesting dynamics as a scholar as a practitioner and someone who has engaged in groundbreaking research for ESCAP, but also who brings in a strong perspective from working in his own home government. So we see a combination of all the key dimensions of practice, of theory, but also of governmental experience. So Dr. Malik, your participants, 15 minutes, please.
Thank you, Zania. Thank you very much for a generous introduction. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Okay, so thank you so much. Let me begin the presentation and set the scene a little bit and look forward to a very engaging and important conversation. Basically, I'll be talking about the socioeconomic impact of COVID-19, primarily focusing on SPECA countries, wherever the data is available, and trying to tease out some of the policies that these countries can consider as they move forward in terms of engineering and economic recovery and resume their journey towards 2030 agenda for sustainable development. Next slide, please. So here are three key messages that I'm going to focus on in my presentation. First of all, I'll demonstrate that COVID-19 is truly an unprecedented shock. We already know that. We are experiencing it actually, both in our public life, professional life, and in personal lives as well. So what I'm going to show is it has actually caused unprecedented economic contraction in the region that have not seen such contraction for the last at least 6 decades. As a consequence, there are significant job losses, considerable increase in poverty, and many other adverse implications. So what it all means is the pursuit of sustainable development goals is going to become even more challenging. It was already an uphill task for many countries. It's going to become even more difficult. Number two, I'm going to show some evidence that the range of policy packages the country has announced. In some cases, they are significant. In some countries, of course, depending on their fiscal and policy space, they were relatively small. However, as a whole, Asia Pacific has come up with unprecedented policy packages. But the interesting and more real question is how long they can sustain this kind of policy support going forward. And that's going to be a critical policy question. And that's where I think we'll hear interesting insights from member states and from discussants. And last but not least, in terms of the principle that I want to highlight, when the countries should discuss their policies, should not be only focused on trying to recover GDP growth prior to the COVID crisis. The focus should be much more on what we call people and planet-centric recovery to build essentially resilient, inclusive, and sustainable economies. So let's get into the specifics now. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's start with the big picture. This is the snapshot of the North and Central Asia region, which includes 6 of the 6 SPECA countries, and in total there are 9 countries in the North and Central Asia region. This snapshot simply shows the blue bars are the progress up to date, goal by goal, that for the Central Asian countries that they have done so far on average. What it shows is the middle solid black line that you see is according to the methodology that ESCAP has developed, the countries should, a sub-region should have been on that black line by 2019, according to the latest available data. However, as you can simply see, in some cases they have done that. For instance, goal 4 and goal 6 and goal 10, they're doing pretty good. In fact, ahead of the plan progress. But in some instances, more work is needed. And what is most worrisome is actually there is very limited progress, in some cases regression, reverse trends in some instances, like climate-related actions, for instance, right? So I highlight 3 areas, and I'm going to link the policy advice or policy recommendation that I'm going to highlight later with these 3 priority areas. So one way to understand or interpret this graph is countries may consider focusing on 3 broad areas to go after as they conceive their recovery plans. One is to go after health and social protection. The other is transport connectivity. And third is environment protection. These 3 areas, according to the SDG data, tells us it can help them accelerate progress towards SDGs, and as a consequence, of course, in the process, of course, for the economic recovery as well. Next slide, please. So this is an extremely important graph, and took my team a while to put it together. This actually makes a very, very fundamentally important point. On the left-hand side, it is showing the additional SDG investment requirements or needs country by country. This is based on our research that was published in 2019 in our flagship publication, Economic and Social Survey for Asia and the Pacific. So for the region, Asia Pacific as a whole, the average was around 5% of GDP, or around $1.5 trillion. Of course, it varies country to country quite a bit, and I'm showing the 7 SPECA countries over here. You can see for Afghanistan, that number is close to 25% of GDP. For Kyrgyzstan, that's even higher, approaching 30% of GDP almost. And then we have a breakup in our methodology, 3 broad categories: people, prosperity, and planet. So you can simply look at the scale of the additional requirements that are needed. And then what I've tried to map is on the right-hand side panel is how much they are doing right now. And based on that, what is likely to happen in the near future. So what you see is, for instance, let's take the example of Afghanistan, for instance, right? Or Kyrgyzstan, any country as an example. So the left-hand side showed what they needed. So in Afghanistan was 25%, of Kyrgyzstan was around 30%. And what they're showing right now on the right-hand panel is how much they're actually putting in place, financial flows, the projected. And these projections are based on what countries have done so far in the last 5 years, 2016, 17, 18, 19, and in some cases 2015 data. So I've taken the average for Asia Pacific region, which is about 2%, which is a blue bar. And then the optimistic scenario, in the sense if they step up their effort by 5% growth in the financial flows towards SDGs, how much is going to happen? And you can simply see, even in the optimistic scenario, which is quite unlikely given the current last 4 or 5 year trends, Afghanistan reaches only 2% of GDP when they need 25% of GDP. In Kyrgyzstan, in the optimistic scenario, they might generate 5% of GDP of flows, and they need 30%. So the point is extremely straightforward and extremely important. There are huge financing gaps that these countries faced as they try and pursue sustainable development agenda. And we'll try and talk about some policies that we can consider to try and close this gap. Next slide, please. So now coming to the specifics of the COVID itself. This is the context and background against which COVID impact took place. And we can simply eyeball the impact of the COVID on the GDP growth rate. So this is plotting last 50 years of data. And for instance, the green line is the total ASCAP countries, blue is developing ASCAP, and red is the total ASCAP region, including advanced countries. So you can see there is very considerable contraction that is likely to happen. Negative growth, as we sometimes call it, right? Significant contraction actually in the region. On average, we are expecting around, for developing Asia Pacific, for instance, -2, right? That's a significant contraction. I've compared it with the 2008 global financial crisis and the 1997 Asian financial crisis, the 2 major shocks that the region experienced in the last few decades. So point is very simple. The scale of the impact of the COVID-19 on economy, on GDP, is quite enormous. Next slide, please. These are the revisions that we have taken so far. There are considerable uncertainty around. So what I've shown is, you can see on the left side, total ASCAP region, developing ASCAP region, and then zeroing in on the North and Central Asia. And on the right side, of course, I show the SPECA countries. The gray bars are simply showing the difference between GDP forecasts, what we were doing last year around November, and what our latest estimates are showing. So you can again see considerable revisions have taken place in the estimates of how the economies are likely to place. The red dots are actually point estimates, actual forecast of GDP in 2020. And you can see for most countries, except Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, there is considerable contraction that is happening. Is expected, right? For North and Central Asia region as a whole, including Russia, that approaches about 10% of the revision, or the actual amount is 8% contraction. That's enormous contraction that these countries are faced with as a whole on average, and you can see the variation in the region as well. So countries face a considerably uphill task. Next slide, please. Okay. So the impact of COVID is not only limited on GDP. As a consequence, it has a huge impact on the job market, for instance. Enormous job losses have been experienced. This is simply showing the ILO monitoring data. So the left-hand side is the number of jobs, full-time jobs, and the right-hand side is simply showing the same data, but presented as a share of total working hours. So with the leftmost panel is, for instance, for the Asia-Pacific region as a whole. And the 3 bars are blue is for Q1, red is for Q2, and the gray is for Q3, very latest numbers. In fact, last week they were released. So you can see, for instance, in Asia Pacific as a whole, in Q1, 128 million jobs, full-time jobs were lost, or look at the right-hand side panel, about 7.5% of total working hours were lost. In Q2, the impact was even more pronounced for the region as a whole, with job losses increasing to 280 million, or equivalent of about 15% of GDP. And you can see the variation in different sub-regions as well. Impact, for instance, in Central and Western Asia, where a lot of Central Asian countries fall, according to ILO categorization, the number of share of working hour lost is enormous, going to 25% or above. So the impact of GDP contraction is one thing, but understanding the impact on the job market, job losses, is another one. Next slide, please. Of course, job losses, contraction in income have a direct impact, a direct bearing on poverty. And these are the latest poverty estimates. Millions of people are likely to be pushed back into poverty. These are, again, latest numbers and estimates, I think released last week by World Bank. So baseline scenario of COVID initially were this thought, and the latest one when they're considering other downside factors, for instance, delay in the vaccine and its outreach and so on and so forth. So the two scenarios in a way. And you can zero in, for instance, the middle part, which shows the metric of $3.20. You show on the right side, I show $5.50 metric, and the more conventional one, $1.90. You can pick any one. So middle one is $3.20, and it shows really significant numbers, exceeding 200 million people are likely to, 220 million people almost, are likely to push back into poverty. And a bulk of them actually are from South Asia, 132, according to the $3.20 metric. So that's a huge impact. Some estimates say this is pushing back about 10 years, somewhere between 5 and 10 years of progress that we have made on poverty reduction, and we push back by these many numbers of years on average. And again, the story becomes much more nuanced once you look at the country level data, wherever it is available. So the impact is enormous. Next slide, please. This is just a simple way of showing it was one upshot, one upside of the entire crisis, that it provided some breathing space to the environment. So this is showing the PM 2.5 indicator of air pollution quality, air pollution, and you can see the red line is what was going on in 2019, and blue lines are for 2020. And you can see in most cases, for instance, in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, and Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, blue line is lower than the red line, indicating because of the economic contraction and slowdown, because of job losses and stuff, at least there is some breathing space, some quality, air quality has actually improved. However, we also are aware, we can understand that as and when the economic activities recover and pick up, we are likely to actually go back to the pre-crisis level. And that's where the policy package can play a significant role to make sure that we try and capitalize on this opportunity and make sure these environmental gains are sustained over time. So we have to tweak the policies. In simple words, we should try and not go back to the old way of pursuing GDP growth. We should pay attention to the quality of GDP growth, not how much GDP growth is taking place, but how, what is contributing to GDP, what is the quality of GDP growth. Next
Dr. Hamza, you have 3 more minutes.
Oh, I thought 2015 I had in my 20 minutes. Okay, fair enough.
3 more minutes.
Sure. Next slide, please. So this is the policy packages now. This is the average from the fiscal, what the countries have already done. For North Central Asia, this is about 3.5%, and I show a variation across countries on the right-hand side panel. You can see in some instances it's significant, for some countries it's small. This is an enormous package, right? On average, about 5% of GDP they've already spent. And as I pose the question, the real interesting question is how long they can sustain that. Next slide, please. So similarly, on the monetary side, significant measures have taken place, a variety of them, interest rate cuts, liquidity measures, support to SMEs, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. So this is an interesting question. Can they sustain that? And if you can see, for instance, on the right-hand side, which is a country level detail, left is the information on Asia and Pacific for the fiscal position. So the gray bars are the fiscal balance, is the fiscal balance number, and the red is actually what was the case last time. And you can see considerable deterioration. The red arrows pointing down, that the fiscal balances are deteriorating in almost all countries, in fact, in all countries significantly. for the region as a whole, that is going to be the case as well. So the upshot is very simple. Countries have come out and trying to support with massive expansion of fiscal policies, but the consequence is the fiscal space has been squeezed. Next slide, please. So we can skip that. This is just broader principle what they should do initially, prioritize flow lives and livelihoods, and then try and build the planet, the economies in a resilient, inclusive, sustainable manner by focusing on people and planet. Next slide. So this is what I wanted to show. There are two slides I'll show and then I'll stop. Policy options, one. So the obvious question is how to increase fiscal space so the support coming from the government, from the policy side can continue. And I list about, I would say, 10 different ways of doing that, which centers around reprioritizing public spending, widening tax base, improving tax administration, increasing progressivity of the tax system, relaxing fiscal rules, which a lot of countries are actually already done, managing the assets of the government much better, considering innovative financial instruments, improving debt management. And we are trying to now, and then so on and so forth, reducing illicit financial flows and other things. And we're trying to put numbers, estimates, how much countries can actually save or create fiscal space by pursuing these policies. And I provide evidence in my slides, which you can look at later on. And why would you do that? So this is the kind of policies I think I will focus on when we have a discussion. And I'll show you one or two more slides and I'll stop. Next slide, please. These are just examples that I'm showing from numbers of the policies that I highlighted earlier. Next slide. So the purpose, this is the link back to my first point, that what should be focus of priorities if you want to pursue SDGs. So create fiscal space through those measures and then invest in social protection and public health emergency. So I'm simply making that point. Next slide. So this is the next slide. Let's skip the examples part. I think so. The other than fiscal space, the other option is on channeling private finance, how to engage private sector. And there are a few examples, very specific examples where we have worked with several countries. One is encouraging private investment through, for example, public-private partnership, PPP projects. And that is important for transport connectivity, which is a major concern policy area, as I showed you earlier, for the Central Asian region. The other one's on engaging public institutional investors to SDGs. The other one is remittances, actually a big part of story in Central Asia, and that can be channeled, and there are many ways to do that. And the last, but definitely not the least, is what we call ESG standards, trying to provide framework and norms where countries attract private investment for SDGs. And that's the kind of work we're doing. Next slide, please. This is just an example. You can skip that, skip that. So this is skip that. This is just an example of how we're doing that. This is my bottom line, okay? Oh, yeah. So what I've said is simple. COVID-19 is threatening people's lives and livelihoods as we have, none of us have seen that. Maybe our grandfathers experienced something like that, not us. So the bottom line is policy support must continue. Austerity is not an option. IMF and World Bank were roundly criticized in the October annual meetings because implicit in their policy support and packages is a built-in austerity down the line. And what UN, what we are and SCAP are proposing is this should not be an option. Countries need significant support, so austerity is not a thing. Then how to provide support, what to focus on. And again, I started with the principle of focusing on SDGs and investing in people and people and planet. And I gave you several examples of that, how to do that. And then, of course, 2030 agenda is already provides a very good framework to try and build resilient, inclusive, and sustainable economies. Thank you, Chair. I spilled over about 2 minutes, but that's all right. But I'll leave you with these thoughts on policy suggestions that I put across and look forward to engaging conversation and discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Malik. And please accept my apologies for cutting you short because your presentation is truly profound. And you have provided us a range of issues that should challenge all of us. And I'm really hoping that we'll have some free time after the presentations to hear from member states on all the prescriptions and their responses. So thank you very much. And I do hope that your presentation should be shared with all participants as well. So Excellencies, moving on, I'd like to invite our second lead speaker, who is also in his own right a scholar practitioner, Dr. Subir Lal, who is the Deputy Director in the Middle East and Central Asia Department of the IMF, with wide-ranging experience across many countries. And just like Dr. Malik, Dr. Lal brings town and gown together, taking the practice, the theory from universities into the practice of IMF and using that to support the member states. But most importantly, also being a co-author of some groundbreaking IMF reports, the World Economic Outlook and the Global Financial Stability Report. So, Dr. Lal, we can't wait to hear from you, your audience. 15 minutes, please. And maybe I should remind you when you have 5 more minutes so that you know. Over to you.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you very much for the very kind introduction, Dr. Ogiello. And I would also like to thank the SCAP and Ms. Wemer as well for inviting me and for this opportunity to speak. I think it's very important at this time that we all come together as the international community and our member countries to take stock of where we are and what the prospects are going ahead. Since I'm following Dr. Malik's very nice presentation, it gives me the opportunity to focus on a few issues and rather than repeat some of the same facts, since he has already outlined both where we are and some of the ways ahead. I'm going to focus on a bit more on a few of them. The next slide, please. So in terms of my presentation, I'm going to cover a few things. And this might link back to Dr. Malik's brief mention about austerity, and I think it might be good to clarify what the stance, what the policy position of the IMF is on that and the World Bank. And then also talk about mobilizing financing, especially towards the sustainable development goals, and more broadly for the overall development objectives of the countries. I also want to then talk about a little bit more about how to make the recovery sustainable and inclusive, which is an important priority that we all share. And finally, finish with the role of the IMF. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we know that because of both the size of the GDP shock due to the COVID-19 and due to the policy responses, fiscal and external balances are projected to deteriorate in all the countries in Central Asia and SPECA countries, and in some cases quite significantly. And the fact is that the higher fiscal deficits and debt burdens will erode fiscal space. And a lot of these countries did not enter this crisis with enough fiscal space to begin with. And so fiscal risk could intensify. And they may raise sustainability concerns for some countries. And of course, weaker external positions have also led to rising gross external financing needs. So one of the things, unfortunately, we cannot get around is when we look at the medium term, and once the crisis has passed, that rebuilding buffers and reducing financing requirements will remain important, because debt sustainability concerns could arise, and they would entail large fiscal consolidation efforts for many countries. And so we do encourage medium-term fiscal plans to be anchored around strong fiscal frameworks. That does not mean doing it now, but certainly one needs to have an anchor for the medium term. And one also needs to think hard about managing fiscal risks. And what I'm talking about is also about the impact of, for instance, the activities of state-owned enterprises, which are very large in many countries, and off-budget items. These need to be assessed, managed, and transparently disclosed. And mitigation measures may need to be applied. Now, to create fiscal space for meeting the SDGs, and as discussed in Dr. Malik's presentation, there is in fact significant scope, for instance, to improve revenue mobilization, including by raising indirect taxes, broadening tax bases, strengthening revenue administration to tackle informality, and enhance compliance. These are all medium-term objectives. This is not for now, because right now, indeed, as Dr. Malik also said, is the time for saving lives and livelihoods. On the expenditure side, efforts should focus on spending rationalization once we get into the medium-term policies, especially where public sector wage bills are really high, which is true in a number of countries, and to increase the efficiency of spending, especially in health and education. Next slide, please. As also discussed in Dr. Malik's presentation, mobilizing private financing for SMEs and addressing high interest rate spreads and weak intermediation would be critical for the recovery. This would be a step change from the past. Basically, it would be for us to embrace the idea that the public sector needs to focus on within a fixed envelope of resources on a few key things that are oriented towards the SDGs, and make way for the private sector, where the private sector can and should lead in the economic recovery. Now, on the left chart, what you can see is that the indicators of financial deepening and inclusion are quite low across the region. And I wanted to focus on this topic because the private sector and access to finance will be a complement to what the public sector should do, and in different areas, quite possibly. For most countries in the region, as I mentioned, the financial inclusion gap is quite high. Now, in the right-hand side chart, you can see that the credit to GDP levels are lower in these countries, in the SPECA countries, relative to other emerging market and developing economies. The cost of credit, for example, is high in Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, and collateral requirements are high in several other countries, including Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and the Kyrgyz Republic. And our analysis has shown that reducing participation costs, for instance, where 100% of firms have access to bank credit, or taking collateral requirements to a minimum, for example, loan collateral value of 100%, that would bring significant growth benefits. Next slide, please. So here, and now in terms of supporting bank credit and SME financial inclusion, one needs to take a holistic reform approach. There's no magic bullet here or one switch one can flip to make it happen. Of course, strengthened institutions are important. Competition in the banking system, not dominated by one or two big banks, sound supervision by the central banks or the Financial Supervisory Authority, as the case might be, credit information availability, and so on. What is also important, and that's in the holistic sense, is a lower state footprint, and that would limit distortions and private sector crowding out, and it would support further financial deepening and inclusion. Enhanced financial oversight would promote strong risk management by financial institutions and help ensure that credit is allocated to firms and households efficiently and prudently. And so I really wanted to emphasize this point about how reducing the role of the state in some areas will be very crucial to the recovery. Well-designed public guarantees can help in credit availability right now during the crisis, but in order to limit risks in the future, they need to be temporary, transparent, and well-targeted towards viable firms facing distress, and while practicing good risk management. Now, in terms of stronger bank balance sheets, that of course we all agree are important in the financial sector. And our analysis shows that the potential costs from COVID crisis-related asset impairment for the region in Central Asia could amount up to $10 billion or 2% of GDP of the countries in our study. And it is important to proceed with restructuring, and of course, at this point, again, as we are in the crisis, solvency and liquidity buffers should be used as needed. However, we don't think that lowering prudential requirements below the minimum or relaxing loan classification should be undertaken, because that can lead to excessive risk-taking and blur asset quality, and balance sheet repair could be undermined. Then, of course, as we all know from past crises, that becomes a fiscal problem, and that further impedes fiscal space. And next slide, please. The previous session actually already talked quite a bit about this increasing role of fintech and how that can help both mitigate the impact of the pandemic, which it has been doing, cashless transactions, and also for the deployment of government support. And digital services can help fill existing gaps in traditional financial development. And it complements rather than substitutes for other forms of credit. And it is associated with higher GDP growth. And it promotes greater reach of financial services. Deepening capital markets would also be important because sound development of securities and capital markets does require strong infrastructure and legal frameworks. So part of the holistic approach is to move along that front as well. And deep sovereign markets are a key step to have a benchmark, for example. And finally, promoting green finance. I'm going very quickly over these, but the slides will be available to you. Climate policies, new technologies, they're all prompting a reassessment of the value of financial assets. And so there are ways to better distribute those risks, but also to attract new capital to new and green sectors. Next slide, please. One other thing that is worth mentioning is that for this region, integration and international trade and financial networks would be very beneficial. In general, the region is poorly integrated in international trade and financial networks. Non-oil exports by SPECA countries are about half of the average for emerging markets and developing economies. And capital flows, which are mainly FDI within and into the region, are relatively limited and have not grown significantly since the 2008 global financial crisis. Some estimates suggest that greater integration in global value chains could raise income levels in this region by 5 to 10 percentage points over the next decade. And so current global financial conditions are in fact quite favorable thanks to the G3 central banks and other measures. And it's an opportunity for the region to mobilize additional financing to support the recovery and to tap into it. And also developing domestic markets would make sense at this time. And there is a need to remove obstacles to that, including developing instruments and markets to hedge FX risk, for example, and to improve governance, to strengthen fiscal and monetary frameworks and institutions, and to improve human capital, which is, of course, a longer-term ambition as well. Next slide, please. These three figures echo Dr. Malik's presentation, show that even before the pandemic, the countries here lagged their peers in terms of infrastructure, private investment, and human capital. And the countries are below emerging countries' average, with problems stemming from low efficiency of public spending, especially in rural areas. Next slide, please. And so ambitious structural reforms will be needed to support successful economic and private sector-led growth and job creation. Many of the countries in the region have already completed what we would call market enabling reforms. And now progress would be needed on market deepening and market sustaining reforms, including on governance, financial deepening, privatization of some of the larger firms, commercialization of infrastructure, and other elements to strengthen the business environment. This needs to be, it remains work in progress, but further efforts would present large potential gains because gaps in the region remain considerable. Next slide, please. So as mentioned earlier, creating space for priority spending is critical to delivering on the region's development priorities. And social spending can improve social indicators. You all know this, of course, and it can help promote inclusive growth. That's not new. And several countries in the region still fall behind other low-income and emerging economies in terms of their level of social spending. And so what COVID does is it threatens to undo the gains in social indicators unless social spending is prioritized by the public sector. And building a foundation for stronger governance would help raise overall human development. And what figures 2 and 3 show is that there's scope for improving the efficiency as it still lags in other countries and regions. And the region could improve efficiency of social spending through strengthening institutions, promoting transparency and accountability. And building foundations for stronger governance and fighting corruption is positively associated with higher human development. And you can see that it's not very clear in this format from the bottom 2 charts. Next slide, I think I'm close to the end. So the region stands to make big gains from increasing both the level and efficiency of social spending. And this would have a significant impact on overall human development and progress towards the SDGs. And what this figure shows is that boosting social spending by 10% and improving corruption levels, reducing corruption in that sense, or the perception of corruption, would increase human development indicators by around 40%. So the gains are potentially very large. And this would, of course, mean creating more space for the private sector to do other things that have used fiscal resources by the state sector in the past. Next slide. This is the last slide. What is the IMF's role in all of this? So during the pandemic, And you may know, some of this already. IMF has been quite active in countries in the region and in fact worldwide, both through offering policy advice as well as capacity development and financial support to ease the burden on countries. In the Caucasus and Central Asia region during the crisis, emergency financing, what we call Rapid Credit Facility and Rapid Financing Instrument, RFI, RCF, of about 100 billion, sorry, that's for the over 100 countries, it's beyond this region, 100 billion in additional financing was made available. And then grants for debt relief to 28 countries. There have also been, of course, the G20 calls for bilateral debt relief to 73 low and middle income countries. And the fund has also augmented existing lending arrangements in countries where there were already financial programs in place. And finally, capacity development programs have been expanded, including online, through online platforms because of the restrictions on travel. Finally, the fund is opening a new capacity development center in Almaty next year. It was supposed to be this year, but it's been delayed because of the pandemic. And so it's launching virtually this year, and the physical launch will be next year. And that'll be an important opportunity as well to step up the fund support for capacity and institutional development in core policy areas for countries in the region. I think that's it from my side. Thank you very much again. I'm sorry I had to rush through this, but I hope you got the gist of the messages here. And back to you, Dr. Ojielo.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Lowell. Yes, I do apologize also because you have highlighted some extremely important issues. And as I said in my opening remarks, these are the challenges that our governments are grappling with right now. And in particular, the one that you highlighted, when you talked about prioritizing social spending, and I think that each of our governments is grappling with this tension. Where should the focus of efforts lie? The predominance of our approach should it be in trying to kickstart the private sector because government needs revenue streams to then be able to provide the social services. And yet both you and Dr. Malik are saying it's about people first, and this is fundamental. So I can't wait for the discussion part because it will be important to hear from our member states. How are they making these difficult decisions? What are they weighing on? And how are they responding to the policy proposals that have come from both of you? Over the last couple of years, the United Nations system has supported acceleration of the SDGs through the mainstreaming acceleration and policy support framework. And every government mentioned green finance, green economy. And how are they operationalizing this? So there's a lot to discuss. That's why I'm very keen for us to quickly get through the presentations and invite our member states' response. So excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let's now proceed to the discussants. And I'd like to invite my ESCAP colleagues to put up the 4 questions on the screen, but I defer to my discussants which are the 4 questions they want to respond to, but also what additional issues they want to address. And our first discussant, it's another distinguished scholar and practitioner and teacher who has significant experience in theory and practice, as well as in leading global management and accounting firms. So I'd like to invite Professor Alexander van de Putte, who is the chairman of corporate governance and stewardship of the Astana International Finance Center. Very distinguished resume that we wouldn't have time to review. But Professor van de Putte, if you could limit your intervention to a maximum of 5 minutes, I will be deeply grateful. Over to you.
Good morning. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes, both.
Lovely. Thank you for the kind introduction. I will address primarily question number 3 and question number 4 that you kindly shared with me beforehand. So first of all, I don't think that anybody anticipated the emergence of the pandemic, and nor did we. Luckily, our strategic options at the AIFC and therefore also Kazakhstan, however, allowed us to act rather quickly to the new reality. And the reason is that we previously had identified potential discontinuities in the external environment and also include these externalities in our strategy. As Dr. Hamza mentioned, the objectives of our strategy is not just plain GDP growth, but the emphasis is actually on both sustainable, inclusive, and more resilient growth. It's actually the terms that we had used in the past, so we had not included them more recently, and also not following the outline of this session. And we were actually positively surprised that the three terms, sustainable, inclusive, and resilience, were also at the center of the discussion today. Now, in early March, when it became clear that the pandemic was upon us, we developed a set of plausible, internal, consistent, and divergent scenarios. And this to explore how the pandemic could unfold, but also to assess its socio-economic implications on Kazakhstan, but also the Central Asian region. We also use these scenarios in order to stress test our strategic directions. The question was really, do our strategic directions still hold? And that led to another study. And that other study was the $1 trillion economy by 2040, a strategy for sustainable, inclusive, and more resilient growth. And again, the emphasis was not just on just GDP growth, but truly on sustainable, inclusive, and more resilient growth. So the question then is, how do we intend to achieve that? And our three strategic directions fall in the following areas. First of all, we want to leverage the circular economy. For those who don't know what the circular economy is, it's about the 3 R's. It's about reduce, reuse, and recycle. What? Waste, in order to solve a problem in one part of the economy, and at the same time contribute to entrepreneurship, but also to sustainability. It will also enhance the competitive advantage periods of the oil and gas sector and making it more sustainable as well. At the AIFC and in Kazakhstan, we define sustainable growth as balancing and growing all 5 capital stocks. What do we mean with that? Natural, manufactured, human, social, and financial capital. And therefore, we believe that our definition of sustainability is also aligned with the SDGs. You have 17, we have 5, but they're largely aligned, we would say. Second is to invest in both digital and physical infrastructure. And this is the backbone for 2 broad initiatives that go beyond the borders of Kazakhstan and even Central Asia. And one is the digital enabled New Silk Road. So not digital New Silk Road, but digital enabled. So there will still be physical improved, we believe, resiliency as well in the way that energy is supplied wherever it's needed at an affordable cost. But also it will be based on more sustainable energy at the same time. Finally, we want to leverage the 4th Industrial Revolution and its technologies to a number of key sectors of the economy. And that includes agriculture development. We're working there together with the EBRD, but also with the Asian Development Bank, energy, mining, education, transportation and logistics, but also tourism. And you may have heard that recently we launched a tourism cluster at the Caspian Sea, and it was actually announced by El-Baseh, our first president, Nursultan Nazarbayev. But also what we want to do is to leverage the 4th Industrial Revolution to make the digital enabled New Silk Road and also the Eurasia Renewable Energy Internet a reality. We are convinced that based on the modeling that we have done, that our strategic directions will not only allow us to emerge from COVID-19 strongly and rapidly, but also will contribute to sustainable, inclusive, and more resilient growth. I want to finish on 2 small points. Similar to Azerbaijan, we are working with the World Economic Forum to establish an affiliate center of the 4th Industrial Revolution. For your information, I was previously part of the World Economic Forum leadership team, and I'm currently part of the team to establish the Center of the 4IR here in Kazakhstan. And finally, significant upskilling will be required. And this to develop the competencies, but also the mindsets to be effective in this new environment. Therefore, we have created already 4 years ago, the Bureau for Continuous Professional Development. And this includes, and that's relatively recently, the Quam School. And this is to enhance the digital competencies of people in the Central Asian region, financial literacy, but also allow them to contribute to the previously mentioned areas, circular economy, digital and physical infrastructure, and leveraging the fourth industrial revolution to a number of sectors. I want to leave it at that. Back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Van de Putte. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think for all of us in the region, the objective should be to emerge strongly and rapidly and to contribute to sustainable, inclusive, and more resilient growth. That's a real capstone for the whole focus of the discussion. And thank you for that intervention. Lots to learn from you on that score. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to now move to my next panelist. And I'm very happy now that we're bringing in some gender dimension, even though my panel is not particularly well gendered. But I'm very happy to introduce a very distinguished practitioner, analyst, a philanthropist, and a businesswoman par excellence. Can we confirm that Madam Baishanalieva is connected? Yes, she is. Very good. If you can unmute your microphone.
Hello? Can you hear me?
I can see you. I can hear you. Welcome.
Sorry, Azonia, I missed your presentation, but I think you made a kind presentation of me, introduction of me. So good morning, everyone. Good morning, dear speakers. I had a chance to receive Mr. Hamza's presentation in advance in order to prepare my opinion and the view about the role of private sector and the business sector in the COVID recovery. During pandemic situation in the context of a total crisis, the agenda of sustainable development goals has become more relevant than ever for the Kyrgyz Republic. The pandemic has further exposed the existing socioeconomic problems in the country that have accumulated over the years of independence. During the quarantine period, we witnessed the poverty of the population, the inability of health care system to provide an adequate services to the citizens, the unpreparedness of the education system for the new forms of knowledge transfer, massive domestic violence, an increase in unemployment, and a number of other challenges relevant in the goal of sustainable development. The private sector is an unavailable and effective source of sustainable development goals. The contribution of the business community can be observed at both micro and the macro levels. By creating jobs, enterprises are addressing many issues of domestic violence, gender inequality, and poverty, striving to create competitive and sustainable business models of the enterprise lead the country towards innovations, business models, innovations, new development practices, quality education, national nature management, and a culture of consumption. In the struggle for customer loyalty and in the production of eco-oriented products, enterprises promote responsible production and consumption. The growth of enterprises and the number of jobs automatically generates the development of infrastructure, improvement of services to the population, and the industrialization of cities and towns. And of course, without the private sector, countries cannot achieve sustainable development goals. And the private sector here, we should not only consider as a taxpayers, but also as a key partner in the implementation of sustainable development goals. So entrepreneurial activity today is considered by state politicians as a source of budget replenishment. However, if we reconsider this approach and recognize partners in business entities for the implementation of sustainable development goals, the state will be able to quantitatively regulate the socioeconomic processes in the country. Today in the Kyrgyz Republic, state authorities apply traditional forms of state regulation of the business community, which doesn't allow enterprises to introduce innovations, dynamically develop and experiment with new ways of producing goods, works, and services. Regulatory barriers are blocking the business community from dynamically responding to the effects of the pandemic. By creating a regulatory policy of a new format aimed at stimulating innovation and creating new jobs, removing tax, reducing regulation, and expanding self-regulation practices, state will be able to take a big step towards a way out of the pandemic situation. So I have here prepared some notes that state regulatory policy should take a course towards the following: reducing the tax burden in return for creating jobs, reducing the tax burden in return for the introduction of innovations in education, healthcare, and manufacturing, reducing the tax burden in exchange for the development of business infrastructure, refusal from state regulation in exchange to the introduction of quasi-regulation or self-regulation, decriminalization of offenses arising in the implementation of entrepreneurial activity, reducing the number of tax disputes, close cooperation with industry business associations in achieving sustainable development goals. The private sector's contribution to recovery from the pandemic could be as follows: development and implementation of high-quality online education, providing the population with modern, high-quality medical services, development of infrastructure of cities and other settlements, job creation, remote consumption by financial services, remote consumption of goods, works, and services, development and implementation of innovative technologies in all sectors: medicine, education, finance, and manufacturing. So this is my point about the role of private sector, and I try to not repeat what already mentioned by Mr. Hamza. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Madam Baishanelieva, for those great remarks. I think you are trying to propose a significant issue for consideration, because very often policymakers complain that the incentives that are given to businesses do not transform or translate into the expectations in terms of jobs and employment. And you're making a direct connection now between tax incentives and specific investments in innovation, in experimentation, and the creation of jobs. And so I like to notify participants and member states that we will have time for them to weigh in on all the interventions by previous speakers. And I'd like to encourage them to use the request to speak button, so we have developed a list of those who might want to say something, so that once I'm done with my last three panelists, then we can open it up for a very interesting discussion. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite my next discussant, who is a good friend of mine and a colleague, but also who brings in this rare combination of being in academia, of being in practice as an international organization, but also working across society. Dr. Ben Slay, it's a scholar, practitioner, analyst who's transited from the university to the academic, to practice, but also now working with UNDP in the Regional Bureau for Europe and Central and CIS states as a senior economist, widely published, written quite a number of books, So I'm really delighted to invite Ben as a discussant in this very interesting session. So Dr. Slay, over to you. And if you don't mind, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Ozonia. I would just like to briefly address the first of the 4 questions that are posted for this session. If we have time, we can turn to the socioeconomic impact assessment in Kyrgyzstan. That's a separate matter. In terms of this first question of the momentum on expansionary policies, I think what we're really talking about here are 2 issues, one of which at least has appeared in the presentations and discussions, but the other one really hasn't, and I think they're important. The one that has appeared is the question of austerity and behind that fiscal space, but the one that hasn't, which I think it needs to be addressed explicitly, it is the whole question of how strong a recovery, an economic recovery, can we expect in 2021? Do we really believe that we will see the back of the pandemic next year or not? My understanding is that many projections for growth next year, including in the IMF, World Economic Outlook, and others, really do assume that the impact of the pandemic is much weaker, if not significantly weakened in 2021. And that, of course, makes possible stories about V-shaped strong economic recoveries, which in turn make possible continued strong expansion of fiscal spending in social protection, in investment in tech and IT infrastructure, investment in health systems and other things. But if this nice story of a strong V-shaped recovery doesn't materialize because we still have the pandemic and lots of people are still either sick or afraid of being sick or are not spending money or not leaving their homes, then we're not in a position to, or rather the prospects for strong expansion of fiscal policy at least look very different. And I think that we really, if we want to discuss this question about how long and how strong a fiscal response especially we can have, we have to ask questions about what is our basic belief about the epidemiological short and medium term future for the countries we're looking at. And I'm not an epidemiologist. I do know that there is good news on the front of vaccines and better, more rapid progress, perhaps than some had anticipated. But that's, it's one thing to have good results in a lab. It's something else to get 7 billion people vaccinated, which is ideally what we would need for a really strong global recovery next year. So I would flag that as the first question that we would, I think, need to think about prospects for continued strong fiscal expansion. And the second is the issue of austerity and fiscal space, which came up in both Professor Malik and Professor Lal's presentations. And here I think, these words like austerity are slogans, and people mean very different things by them, and they arguably necessarily have to mean different things in different countries. If we look at countries like Kazakhstan or Azerbaijan, these countries have oil funds or reserve funds or rainy day funds where monies that have come in through budget surpluses and revenues from taxes on energy exports have been accumulating over time. And these countries have the ability, have the fiscal space to really significantly ramp up fiscal policy without long-term implications for their debt position. That is very different from other countries like, say, like Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan, where in effect, financing for deficits will come either from IFIs or from countries like China, which have been proved willing to lend a lot to these countries, when other creditors were not. And so, whereas in the case of Kazakhstan or Azerbaijan, the question really is, how much do you want to run down the reserve funds or the state oil fund? And that's essentially a philosophical question around which reasonable people will disagree. For countries like Tajikistan or Kyrgyzstan, it's really a question of how much organizations like the IMF, World Bank, and others are willing and able to provide financing. And we have a lot of debt sustainability analysis that underpins this. And it's to some extent, it's a technical question, but to some extent, it's a philosophical question as well. So I think if we really want to develop serious answers that are useful for policymakers about questions of sustaining fiscal expansion over the medium term in response to the difficult challenges posed by the pandemic and its implications, we have to wrestle with these difficult epidemiological and fiscal space issues and realize that there's no silver bullets, and what is appropriate and may apply to one country may not be appropriate and apply for others. So let me stop here. I think I've used up my 5 minutes already. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I hope this was useful. I would also like to very much thank both Professor Malik and Professor Lal for excellent presentations, very thought-provoking. And indeed, I should have started my remarks by saying that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Ben, and very useful interventions. And clearly that's, I'm hoping that member states who are participating in this particular dialogue would like to respond to you in terms of their own analysis of the kind of recovery they want to see over the course of next year, given that even though some vaccines now might probably be rolled out before the end of this year, it's going to take the better part of another 18 to 24 months before it gets to the rest of the global population, as you have highlighted. So what's the thinking at the national level in terms of the continued impact of COVID-19 on the fiscal space, and yet the need for government to respond much more effectively? And I think that many of the questions, I would also like to come back to our lead presenters to hear their take on some of the interventions that have come from discussants. So moving on, Excellencies, I'd like to invite my last but one discussant, who is the Associate Director and the Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of Public Policy and Administration, University of Central Asia. Dr. Roman Mogilevsky is a distinguished scholar, analyst, and a consultant, very familiar with a number of international organizations to which he's rendered service, including the United Nations system in the Kyrgyz Republic, so to the World Bank, to ADB, to the UN and other international organizations. Dr. Mogilevsky, your audience, 5 minutes, please. Please kindly unmute Dr. Mogilevsky.
Yeah, hi. Thank you very much for the kind introduction and for the possibility to talk to this distinguished audience. I would like to reflect on expectations of the COVID crisis versus reality. Well, we are now deep in the process, and we have already some data and statistics, and I would like to provide a few comments on that. Together with our previous speaker, Dr. Bensley, and a few other colleagues, we prepared this report on expected social and economic impact of COVID to Kyrgyzstan. And now it is time to take stock and see what's happened. First of all, everybody expected, and this unfortunately materialized, the deep recession of the Kyrgyz economy. And this is not only economy, well, all economies are affected, but Kyrgyz probably most than others. Because it's most open economy. So that's an kind of expectation which materialized. But there are some other things which deserve attention. First of all, there was expected deep fall in remittances of migrants. And participants probably know that many of countries of the region are very much remittance and migration dependent. Well, that's not materialized, fortunately. According to the official statistics, the remittances in April-September 2020 were plus 2.5%, up compared to the same period of 2019. So we don't see any decline in remittances, while we saw it initially, but now they recovered very fast. That seems to be that the migration is really a resilient mechanism, and people try to resist the external shocks. Second interesting development, and also sort of worrisome, is inflation. We were expecting some increase in inflation, and now, unfortunately, it is materializes. Well, I think in all countries of the region, people observed a hike in inflation in October. And for example, in Kyrgyzstan, 12 months food inflation was already 13.4%, so double digits. Well, of course, the entire inflation rate is lower than 10% because other services and non-food items don't grow up well much, but the food is the most important, especially for poor populations. So this is really a challenge, and I think that will question the some of the expansionary policies, particularly monetary ones in all these countries. Secondly, something which was expected is to harm the economies was border closures. And yes, that's indeed a very big issue, particularly for Kyrgyzstan. Well, especially with regards to the border with China, which is still effectively almost closed. And this produced very big losses for the government budget, among other things. Some other issues with borders, however, fortunately didn't materialize. For example, there was fear of a food export ban. However, due to solidarity response of international organizations, of private sector, of civil society, and due to the preparedness of governments to hear from them, this was really prevented. So there was no shortage of food as per se, so it was really an example of good reaction of the all stakeholders to this challenge. Coming back to the budget, I share Ben's kind of skeptical expectations regarding next year. I think the budget situation is going to be difficult next year, and so this would require thinking about how to close all the gaps, because, and that's actually a question from my side, whether we can expect a similar level of international support for poor countries like Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and some other countries in the region. Well, I'm afraid not. And in this case, some reserves should be accumulated, and probably some fiscal measures to support the economy may be reconsidered just because, well, you need to, it is more important to run usual services in full to maintain the stability in the economies. I would also like to comment on one of the areas where recommendations were made and where surprisingly little response was provided, the social protections area. It's something which was kind of looks like very obvious to do, and yet governments of the region, except Kazakhstan, demonstrated little enthusiasm, basically limiting themselves by food aid to vulnerable groups, and to what extent those vulnerable groups are well targeted is a question actually. And we also observed the lack of proper mechanisms to support sort of unusual, non-standard groups which are now vulnerable and will continue probably vulnerable. We are talking about urban informal workers. So, well, that's the group of people who suffered most from this crisis, and there is no mechanism to support them. I will talking about missing opportunities, and perhaps making my last point is that I would like to mention that, for example, one option would be to simultaneously support the economy and especially construction sector, which suffered very much, and yet to improve to reflect to the green agenda and to improve environmental conditions in the country. One would consider, for example, investing into water supply and sewage facilities in tourist places. Well, tourism sector suffered the most, and that's expected, that's clear. But using this opportunity that there are no customers, it would be possible to swiftly implement investment program and to upgrade something which required upgrade for a long period of time. So far, nothing is done in this direction, but I think it's still not late because the next season would probably be also in very bad. Well, here I would like to stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mogilevsky. And we're very delighted to hear that there's certainly some good news, at least in terms of remittances, which is now stabilized. And I think our lead presenters highlighted this as one of the potential sources of financing to address the impact of COVID-19. But he also then highlighted the continuing challenges. So I'm going to turn around some of the issues you raised as questions to our member states, but also as questions to our lead presenters. For example, lots of policy options have already come through from the lead presenters and from the discussants. It would be interesting to hear from our member states participants, which of these policy options have they taken up? And which ones are they having problems with, and where are the challenges that they are facing? But also from the lead presenter perspective, how much discourse is happening between, say, the United Nations, ESCAP, UNECE, and IMF in terms of this policy approaches to member states? Is there any tension in the discourse? And how are we addressing those tensions? And to hear from the member states what challenges they are facing in a full throttle focus on social protection, given the need to invest in people first. And perhaps to IMF colleague, and perhaps there might be a World Bank colleague who's participating, what's your outlay or outlook on potential continued international support to countries in the SPECA region for next year? So some interesting issues to discuss in the open session, but let's now go to our last discussant, and then we're going to open it up. So I'd like to invite Dr. Sevak Sarukyanyan, who is a consultant of the Euro-Asian Development Bank and visiting researcher at the Center for Euro-Asian, Russian, and East European Studies at Georgetown University. He will speak to us about recovery of free movement through digital structures. Dr. Sarukyanyan, I thank you very much for confirming to be on this panel despite a very late request. So we really appreciate your availability. So your panel, your audience for 5 minutes.
Thanks a lot. I will try to be as short as possible. So during this panel and the former one, many speakers talked about the possibilities of digital technologies in overcoming the negative results of pandemic of COVID-19. So I will tell you the initiatives which we are carrying in the Eurasian Bank of Development in June 2020. The Fund for Digital Initiatives has been created within the Eurasian Development Bank, and the COVID issue became one of the main topics of our activities. So it happened that one of the main issues which Eurasian Economic Union, which 5 members of Eurasian Economic Unions are members also of the Eurasian Development Bank, they faced a big challenge of closing the free movement, which is one of the main acting movements inside the Eurasian Economic Union. So the flights were cancelled, the travel and the migration, also the labor migration inside the Eurasian Economic Union just stopped. So we try to understand how we can overcome this issue. And one of the main results of our discussions is that the biggest issue in overcoming this problem is creating a digital trust inside the Eurasian Economic Union's member states, because the tests and the laboratories and the travel regulations, they are just very liberal, and the states, they are just facing a lot of problems in trusting the test results of other member states. So we started one of the most ambitious projects of the Eurasian Development Bank. It's the project of creating a special app which is called Travel Without COVID-19. So what does it mean, this digital solution for free movement? We are just creating an application which is going to collect the results of tests on absence of COVID-19, which are made in member states. All these collected tests are going to become part of one decentralized platform without any kind of collection of data. And this will give the opportunity to the countries to reopen the flights and make the free movement become one of the main freedoms inside the Eurasian Economic Union. There are two member states inside the Eurasian Economic Union, Armenia and Russia, which are starting the pilot of this project. The app will start hopefully work in December 2020, and after it starts working, we can create a network of trusted laboratories. All the data which we are going to collect, they are going to be available for the authorities of Armenia and Russia, who are responsible for travel and flights. So the people who have negative tests, they will have no any other limit for buying a ticket, for example, and moving from Armenia to Russia and from Russia to Armenia. This is a pilot program, and we hope that the other member states are going to join it. And the most important thing, we started creating in a logic of a decentralized architecture, which means that no common database is created, which is very important in 21st century when we have an issue of protecting personal data and other kind of information. Also, I must say that we have very positive news on the private sector, which is acting in overcoming the negative results of COVID-19. In September 2020, Eurasian Development Bank opened a grant call for all digital startups who are going to offer any kind of solutions in overcoming the negative results of COVID-19 or helping the hospitals or the other actors to face the challenges which COVID-19 is giving us. So I must say that we got 163 initiatives from 6 countries, Eurasian Union member states plus Tajikistan, and the calls are very different, and a lot of them are quite interesting and quite strong. We have especially strong calls from Russia, Kazakhstan, and Belarus, mostly Russia and Kazakhstan. All these startup projects and digital solutions are connected to the issues like public health, education, conferences, meetings, and information shares. So we passed the 2 phases of the calls, and now I think by the end of November, we'll have the finalists, which are going to get financial support from the Eurasian Development Bank. And at the same time, I must say that we are facing another issue during this pandemic, COVID-19. The issue is that some digital solutions are quite connected with regulations of states. So regulations are institutions which cannot be changed immediately. So you can bring COVID-19 digital solution, but for making this solution work, you should change some regulations. But regulations are being changed by governments and by authorities, and it is not a fast project. It is not a fast process. So I think that the main issue for the coming 2 or 3 years will be making the regulation smart and making it quite connected with crisis situations and connected with digital solutions. So from this point of view, I think that during the coming 2 or 3 years, we are going mostly work not only with digital products themselves, but we are going to work with regulations which are leading these digital products, which are making the digital products work inside the economic and social systems. So maybe those will be my short comments as a discussant. Thanks a lot for giving me a chance to share the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sarukayan. Colleagues, we have about 17 minutes for discussion, so that's really wonderful. I see that I already have 2 persons who've indicated to speak, so I'd like to invite Nubek Azolov to speak, and then if I don't see any more indications, I'd like to go back to my panelists because some fascinating questions have already been posed. I'd like to pose to all the panelists this question. Surely these policy proposals that you are making, they are not rocket science. Our member states know this. So why are they not being implemented at scale in the member states? I'd like to hear from each and every one of you on this point. Where are the constraints? Where are the tension points? And what needs to be changed? I would also like to hear your take on the kind of recovery we should see in 2021. And I'd like to hear Dr. Lal talk about how much support could the countries expect from the IFIs in relation to addressing the fiscal constraints that they're going to face next year. So let me invite Nubek Agzolov for his intervention, and then let's see whether there is any other person who's volunteered to speak as well. Mr. Agzolov, over to you, please.
Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги, уважаемые партнеры, дамы и господа.
Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gents. My name is Nurbek. I'm from the Ministry of Finance. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Да, пожалуйста, продолжайте. First of all, before answering your question, I would like to thank you and ASCAP team and the Secretariat, as well as the IMF, for your presentation and highlighting the issues of post-COVID recovery. Investment needs are instrumental, of course, and fiscal measures are pending to promote the solutions offered by the IMF in particular. Of course, we are currently engaged into negotiations with international development partners in order to find solutions according to those challenges which we are currently facing in terms of, first of all, financing the main events aimed at curbing and containing pandemic. Also, I would like to inform you, distinguished development partners, on other issues. Mr. Sultan Akhmatov, Vice Minister of Economy, he would like to inform you through myself on COVID-19 developments, and I would like to inform you on several things on the endeavors made by the government since January this year, when we restricting movements through our borders, and the further crisis beginning from March, the government adopted several measures on supporting those who hurt as a result of the pandemic. First program was initiated in March, which first of all was aimed at supporting SMEs. You know that during the quarantine, many private companies suffered, as well as self-employed individuals. Also, the second package was aimed at further support of self-employed individuals, and then another important initiative on behalf of our ministry is to support socially vulnerable people according to our August governmental anti-crisis program, specifically focused on supporting vulnerable people. And in this regard, I also would like to inform you that we established a working expert group between development partners and the government. And with this, I want to specifically thank our partners for their active involvement into this working group, which is an excellent platform to exchange opinions. We, in particular, discussing our challenges, ongoing endeavors, what we have to be focused on. And as a result, we have very productive meetings. Very briefly, I also would like to say about this expert working group. У нас...
It's okay. Okay, thank you. Очень быстро объясню. Да, в рамках...
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. In the framework of anti-COVID measures, we have 4 working group working with international financial institutions on attracting financial funds. And as my colleague just mentioned, together with development partners, we agreed already on more than $770 million raising through international partners. And these funds will be channeled to quell the immediate needs of supporting our governmental social obligations. I'm talking about social security and health. Secondly, is to support health sector. More than $50 million had been provided. $10 million been spent already this year. And finally, as we mentioned, is to support economy. And again, with our partners, we have a very productive work on supporting the SMEs. There, we will allocate more than 180 million US dollars. With this, I would like to wrap up my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And please accept my apologies that I had to cut you short, because I know there's a lot that the Kyrgyz government is doing, and it would have been wonderful to let all the participants hear about this. But then we need to conclude this session in about 9 minutes, and so I do apologize. Excellencies, I want to come back to my panelists, all 7 of you, because some excellent issues have been put on the table. We will not have time to answer all of them. So I'd like to give each of you 1 minute each to pick on the issue that you think is your last pertinent word. So what is your CNN highlight statement in 1 minute in terms of all you've heard and all of the questions? So I'd like to begin with Dr. Hamza Malik in 1 minute, please, and then we come back to all the other panelists. Just give us your CNN highlights. Dr. Malik, over to you.
Mr. Hamza, please press request to speak one more time.
I'm sorry. Yes, I am giving all the panelists 1 minute each, every one of them. So I'd like to begin with Dr. Malik. 1 minute, your CNN highlights from all that you've heard. What's your most important message or your final message to the participants in 1 minute? And every panel member will have a minute to do the same. So Dr. Malik, please, 1 minute. So maybe while we're waiting for Dr. Malik to connect, can I go to Dr. Lal? Oh, Dr. Malik is now connected, I think. If he's connected, yes, we can hear him for 1 minute. Whoever is ready, yes, Dr. Lal, please, 1 minute. Your final message to the participants.
Sure. No, thank you again. This has been a great conversation. Since you give me 1 minute, I will say this crisis, it's really a big crisis for all of us. It's an opportunity as well. we have all come together as we are coming together right now. It is 1:25 a.m. in Washington, and I'm here because this is important. And we are together with our development partners and with the countries. We need to stay together, not just now, but also in the future. And so that's the first important takeaway message. International cooperation and working openly with all our member countries is the way forward. If anything, this is more about multilateralism. This is not about closing borders and looking inwards. The second is to answer your question, Dr. Ajila. Yes, I oversee the Caucasus and Central Asia, and I can say that certainly in that region, and I know it's true for other regions, our country teams are in contact with authorities to discuss future financial support as well. So obviously some countries don't have buffers and they need help, and the fund will help them in the best way possible through that. And this harks back also to the comments made by others, including Dr. Slade, that we don't know when this will end. So we have to be in this together. We will find a way out of it. We are all learning from each other as well. Cooperation is excellent between us, but we all have different perspectives, and we need to make sure that we remain fresh and on top of how this is evolving. I remain optimistic, but that doesn't mean that we can, relax now. And we will find a way through it as long as we work cooperatively. And money alone is not the answer, but the whole package together, I think, will get us there. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And let me profoundly thank you for being available at this odd hour of the night to participate in this session. Deeply, deeply appreciated. Now, Dr. Malik, your CNN highlights final message to the participants in 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair Ozania. You raise a trillion-dollar question yourself. Why, after knowing all the policies, countries have not been able to implement them, right? That's a fundamental, really, you hit the spot. Let me give you two responses, 20 seconds each. Number one, countries need to muster serious political will. When we talk about creating fiscal space, we are essentially talking about difficult political decisions because they touch upon both spending side issues. Removing fossil fuel-related subsidies or price subsidies is not a straightforward technical decision. It involves a political undertaking. Similarly, on taxation, it's easy to say from the technical standpoint, increase the progressivity of the taxation and consider direct taxation and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, it's a hugely political call. So that's one, muster political will. Number two, related one to this one is the power of narratives. We need to change that. So when I was highlighting, put people and planet at the center and not just economic prosperity or GDP, this is actually a suggestion to change the narrative and believe in that narrative. So far, the last 40 years, the dominant narrative has been, let's grow first and then we'll deal with inequalities and other social considerations. Let's grow first and then we'll invest in social protection. Let's grow first and then we'll deal with environment issues and so on and so forth, right? And lastly, related to this point of narrative, the narrative had been entrenched that state does not need to play a fundamental role in economies, it's a private sector. I think that's mistaken, that needs to change. State has to take a center stage, it must. They're not the paragons of perfection, there are also issues, but so is the case with private sector. And I genuinely believe development cannot be delegated to private sector. State has to take lead, and for that, fiscal space is the critical ingredient. And to create fiscal space, political will is the key. Thank you very much.
Fascinating, fascinating. Thank you very much, Dr. Malik. Professor Van de Putte, I was really excited by your interventions and I had lots of questions for you, but we don't have time to interrogate all of them. Maybe I'll get back in touch with you, Professor, bilaterally. But I'd like to invite you, Professor, for your CNN effect, last minute message to all the participants. Professor Van de Putte first, please. And I'd like other participants to get ready as well, other discussants, so that we don't waste time. Professor, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will indeed try to be very brief. I think that the big challenges are twofold. First of all, the focus in Central Asia and Kazakhstan was largely driven on the extraction industries. That's number one. Number two, it was largely driven by the public sector. Now, in the new reality, therefore, what we need to focus is on stimulating entrepreneurship, the private sector, but also focus on the new realities. Sustainable, inclusive, and resilient growth. And I wanted to briefly talk about how we want to do that, for example, at through the AIFC, the Astana International Financial Center. So let me use a hypothetical project. Let's say the investment of a solar power plant somewhere in Central Asia. Could be Kazakhstan, could be another country as well. Let's say $100 million. First of all, we can register as an SPV. And therefore, it would provide asset protection because the AIFC operates under English common law. That's number one. Number two is we can issue a green bond through the AIX, the Astana International Exchange, together with some partners, the Eurasia Development Bank, EBRD, Asian Development Bank, therefore reducing the cost of capital. Number three is what we can also do is involve the private sector in order to provide the services in order to make actually that solar power plant a reality. Also, we will provide, in addition to asset protection, the ability to repatriate profits to foreign direct investment. And finally, we can even grow the solar power plant further because we could securitize on the AIX and therefore raise more equity that could be provided beyond the initial project. So I would say focus on attracting foreign direct investment beyond the commodity sectors and also involving the private sector in doing so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Fascinating. At some point, I heard you use the word regional, so I'm really interested in exploring how much these ideas are also being shared in the regional context, because everyone can benefit in this zone of prosperity that these ideas can help generate. So thank you for your intervention. I'd like to invite my friend, Madam Bishanalieva, for her 1-minute statement. If you could unmute Madam Nazira Bishanalieva.
Can you hear me?
Yes, very well. Thank you.
Well, I have only one wish. As you know, before our government, they used to consider initiatives and the projects for decades. And now, due to the situation, I think they should understand the extremely important thing is now to take decisions within the 1 day, within the months, but not for decades. Because until they take these decisions, it's already outdated and it doesn't work anymore. So so many panelists, they talk and mentioned about the role of private sector. I want to mention about it again. It is important. If connectivity before it started from the airport, but nowadays connectivity starts from the dialogue between private sector and the state. And of course, with the involvement of the other stakeholders like international donors, embassies, banks, and etc. So this is my wish. Why? Because we have to overcome. First is a health and the lives. Second is a food security, and the third is a economy recovery.
Thank you. The screen seems frozen, so I'm assuming that you've concluded. But thank you so very much for highlighting those key words. I think I've noted them down because they are the center of how we should be proceeding, going ahead. Thank you, and let me invite my friend and colleague Ben Slay for his CNN 1-minute statement. And while Ben is getting ready, I would also like Dr. Mogilevsky and Dr. Sarukanyan to also get ready so that we can quickly conclude in the next couple of minutes. Do we have Ben Slay ready, or any of the others? If they are ready, please jump in. Yes, Dr. Mogilevsky, seems you're ready. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Well, my only addition to the previous discussion is that indeed this is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. And I think it is important to stop considering different policies one by one separately. Whilst this ministry is interested in fiscal and another agency is interested in monetary, and third one cares about structural policies, I think we will be successful if we manage to merge, ideally, all those considerations, simultaneously solving fiscal problems and addressing environmental concerns or social development concerns, difficult, but that's something which seems to be necessary. Thank you very much.
Thank you, deeply appreciated. It's Dr. Bensley, if you're ready, or Dr. Sarukanyan, if you're ready, please weigh in before we conclude. Yes, Dr. Sarukanyan, please go ahead.
Yes, yes. Yes, yes. Thanks a lot. I want to make a very, very short comment. Now we are all discussing in Europe, in Eurasia, in Asia, the problem of interoperability between various different digital solutions in fighting COVID-19. I must say that we also should start thinking about offering interoperability between different practices, because not only the product is important, but the practice, especially the practice in regulation. I think it will make the situation of fight quite more sustainable. Thanks a lot.
Excellent, thank you. It seems that we don't have Dr. Bensley connected, so before I hand over to our Deputy Minister, I cannot summarize in any way the very rich conversation that we've had in the last hour and a couple of minutes. So I have a few words to just capture all that has come through. The partnership, state, private sector, civic groups, community groups, all of those are part of this agenda. Political will, it can be done. Yes, there are costs, but the partnership helps anchor the mitigation and the management of the costs. But we need that political will. We need a storyline. A storyline will tell our people, a storyline of hope, of aspiration, that it's all of us together. That helps address some of the tensions and risks of social instability that we have seen in some countries that have tried to address this. It needs to be integrated. All systems go, all efforts go, a whole of government and a whole of society approach. It's all about dialogue. We've got to talk about this and talk about the solutions. We need a sense of urgency. It cannot be business as usual. We need to do this differently and at speed. And the ultimate result has to be sustainable. It has to be resilient. It has to be inclusive. Forgive me if I have not sufficiently summarized this rich discussion that we've heard, but I look forward to the report of this conversation. And there's been a request that all the PowerPoint presentations be shared with participants. I hope that my colleagues from ESCA are taking note of this. On this final point, I'd like to hand over to my brother and my colleague, His Excellency Sultan Akhmatov, our Deputy Minister of the Economy. Over to you. And thank you for the honor of moderating this session. Thank you very much.
Спасибо, господин Жиела.
Thank you, Mr. Жиела. You're so modest, and we know it. So you just made brilliant conclusions, because we were discussing very sensitive issues. And I think that the issues of financing, so such issues are really so very fast, and they should just bring fast results. But other things are maybe for midterm or long-term prospect. But so that session was really very important. Before just closing the session, I just wanted to make a comment about the dialogue between the government and private sector. Maybe Mr. Mogilevsky just confirmed that thanks to that dialogue, we managed just to support the economy, not to allow it to fall, to drop at the bottom. And so we are where we are. Of course, we could work more, maybe efficiently and deeper, but the measures that we just managed to take, so they just brought the results. And what Madam Bishanlieva mentioned about the reforms and the actions, and I think so they are quite visible, but we are open to any dialogue and to building equal conditions for all participants of these processes. And I do agree that the current situation requires broader mobility from us, maybe more to be more cautious in decision making, because there are some decisions that may cause certain consequences. But what we nobody doubts that we have to work in close cooperation. So I would like to thank all the presenters. I would like to thank all the participants, all the discussants. We really had very active discussion, but regrettably our time frames do not allow us to just continue. Therefore, I would like to thank everyone and to conclude the 5th session. And I invite all our colleagues to join us at 1:30 p.m. Bishkek time for session number 6. Session number 6, moving forward, building back better with view to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you.